Bang! Welcome, everyone. We have Gustav's and Castle this time. Welcome back to the 12 Rules for Life book club. And we're glad to have everybody. This time we'll be covering rules 9 and 10 because we're almost done. Thank goodness. Assume the person you're listening to might know something you don't. This is going to be fun. And be precise in your speech. So, yeah, we're gonna, as RJ rightly points out here, and I do have RJ's notes, which is rather nice. So you get to go over his notes, whether he makes it into the stream or not, which is cool. And of course, we invite everybody to participate in the comments if you wish, or their link is on the Mark of Wisdom Discord server. Just a quick note, we will be rebranding the channel slightly, so navigating patterns will still exist. It will just be under a larger brand, and we're working on that now because the AI told us what to do, and we worship our AI overlords now because we're not fools. Use AI for what it's good for, not for what Peterson says. That's my rule. That's my 13th rule for life right there. Yeah, so first thing we do here is set intentions. So Gustav's, having read these chapters, as I'm sure you did, what is your intention for these for this engagement, these two chapters?
My intention is to fulfill those rules and to look forward into the future, because over the past chapters, I've had a lot of reflective. I've had a reflective attitude towards it that I don't think was that fruitful, actually.
Interesting. Excellent. Okay. Good. I like that. Castle.
Yeah, so the thing, oh, there we go. So I have my little subtitle here as arthropedantic. So I've been keeping with my lobster theme, so I've been getting up to some arthropod antics, but also we're talking about speaking and listening here. And I was thinking about pedantics or being pedantic. So that's kind of like, the type of schoolmaster that's super focused on minor details, drilling memorization on things that are ultimately not going to be relevant. A lot of times, and interestingly, like by delving into what a pedant is, I'm actually kind of being one as I'm kind of going here, because a lot of it is kind of to show like, oh, this is how much I know on a particular subject, which a lot of people can find rather condescending. That means I talk down to people, but a lot of the stuff that we run into in this couple of chapters is about I almost have this sort of lens of, like mortifying the intellect. So you have a lot of times there's, you have this thing of like people just wind up consuming information all the time. And that's something that comes up on this channel a lot is that type of issue that people are just focusing on knowledge for the sake of knowledge. But also a lot of times people will want to justify how they've done that by just kind of spewing a ton of information without actually getting to the heart of an issue or just wanting to be consulted all the time. So just kind of thinking about it a little bit within that lens. I'm looking forward to the exploration portion coming up here.
Excellent. Yeah, I was wondering who Arthur was. Noah, would you like to share your intentions for engaging with us today in the book club?
Yeah. Look at Peterson I want to take a look at Peterson's where Peterson's perspective, where Peterson is bringing in his perspective in his like rhetorical choices and show a kind of a tendency to come to the threshold and then go back and kind of build out a series of propositions and ideas that are related to that. to that kernel or seed that kind of arrived. Is the image was of like a seed, like an idea will come in, and then he'll kind of he'll start to grow it by pointing out propositions. And when you can filter through that and get back to the original point, the original insight, it takes away some of the thorniness of Peterson's writing.
Excellent. Okay. We're not
And the-
writing Noah anymore. He makes us look bad.
Well,
Let's just jump right into to the rule introduction then. So yeah, I have a lot of problems with the way he wrote these two chapters, I gotta tell you. Also, I find it very strange that Mosaic Arc did something on Newton that is going to end up being rather relevant. Yeah, Gustav's knows. I did not listen to the first hour, Gustav's. I took your advice. Although I might go back and listen to the first hour. I did take notes. I haven't posted them as comments yet. Rachel Fulton Brown stuff is excellent. I'm going to have her on the channel on September 24th. We're going to talk about manners. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something that you don't. So, this is interesting. My sort of upgrade is humility first and post hoc rationalization all the way down to Noah's point, and also to the point of, where is Peterson coming from anyway? Peterson's coming from Newton, and Newton, as it turns out, thanks to Rachel Fulton Brown pointing this out, it seems to be the progenitor of objective material reality, something I've been struggling with. But all I had to do was ask her, because she knew all along, I guess. So yeah, does anybody have any questions about the rule or the chapter in general? Not thoughts, just questions or queries, and that includes you, chat, in case you have any questions, ambiguity, or anything you want to ask about that we can straighten up. Usually, no one has any, but we have to ask anyway.
You mean like shallow questions or deep ones? Because if there's like a moderately shallow one, like, do you think that it was a consistent chapter? Because it was hard for me to tell whether he's actually consistent within his own like thinking.
No, completely scattered, ridiculous, very exploratory, very uncertain. This is probably the most uncertain chapter that I remember reading in this book to this point. I might change my mind next week, but this chapter in particular, for me, was much less coherent than the other chapters. I don't want to say by a large amount, because last week, it's the last week, definitely in the running. But this week, I don't think it was that Rule 9 in particular, but it seemed shorter and more confused at the same time to me. Does that straighten it out for you?
It does, because I kind of felt that, but it's good to get a similar, confirmation.
That's what questions is for.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we move to our general thoughts?
So this in formulating the rule, is Peterson telling you this is kind of what I did and here's how it played out?
I would say no.
Okay.
I would say instead what he's doing is a lot of psychological projection, ironically, and a lot of speculation. That's what I would. I mean, it just seemed very confused, and it seemed very much like he was struggling to order his own observations of the world And we will get into that.
Just- yeah,
Let's move to general thoughts. Does anybody have general thoughts on the chapter? I mean, I think Gustav's, you covered both, which is fine. Yeah, I mean, I think I covered my general thoughts too in answering Gustav's. Like, there's a lot of confusion here in my mind. There's just a lot of exploration. But
If I can start with a general thought, my general thought is that
please.
he seems to be struggling to do self-reflection and like being self-aware
Mm.
and seeing himself and like transcending himself, and he really wants to, like, maybe he's coming from a place where he's heard that you can do that, or he thinks that you can do that, he kind of assumes you can do that, or that, I don't know, it seems a lot of confusion around that kind of thing. And then also, even though he talks a lot about self-awareness and seeing yourself and reflecting and kind of being aware that you're dismissive of something when you shouldn't be, maybe. At the same time, he seems to be struggling with the inability for that to happen.
Right, and he's projecting that inability into others when it's clearly at least also his problem. It's kind of hysterical.
Yeah. Peterson's he's trying to he's coming up to limit like this inconsistency in his own thought and his own tools throughout the chapter. And the tools like he walks up to like a mirror, like the mirror that a word can create when it's revealing a concept, and then he'll start to insist like that that language can also reconstruct what's being revealed when you take away and it can't.
Right. That's a good point, Noah. And language is a deconstruction type thing. There's no such thing as deconstruction. It's actually destruction.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to communicate about a thing, you actually kind of have to destroy it and break it into parts. And then hopefully you can sum those parts close enough in a unity that somebody gets the zeitgeist or the gist of the whole, which is what you started with. And so there's a wholeness. You break it into parts. You reunify it through language, hopefully, right? Like, none of this is a given. All of these are steps that you may or may not be able to do, right? And then you communicate that, and then hopefully the other person makes the same unity, and that unity that they make is close enough to the wholeness that they can also now relate to the wholeness, right? That's actually what's happening. It's a very complex process. That's why it's easier to make a mockery, which was the topic of Friday's live stream, than it is to actually speak well and precisely and listen well and precisely. And it's interesting. I think it would have been better if he could have tied these two chapters into one chapter and talked about the relationship between listening and speech, and ditched whatever this garbage is in the middle where he didn't talk at all again about the chapter topics, even a little bit. So yeah, any more general thoughts before we dive into exploration?
So I just wanted to, I guess, kind of hone in a little bit on what Noah mentioned about like reflection and mirrors. I mean, that was a lot of what I was kind of picking up, especially as we'll see a little bit more when we do the exploration. I mean, and especially the point you made about the like finding the limits of his own tools. And something that I harp on a lot is this whole thing of people don't seem to really grasp the an effect can't be greater than its cause. So if you are just constantly looking at yourself, right, and it's just like, okay, I'm trying to, I mean, there's a lot of these examples of everything from like, oh, actually every method of psychotherapy works, and it's just like, oh, and it's like, okay, well, it's almost like they're doing, like divinization is just like, okay, we're using an irrational medium, which is basically the client in this case, and we're just kind of reflecting our own projections off of it, and it's just like, oh, it's hydromancy. But then you also take these things. I mean, it's a lot of stuff about like reflecting on memories and how you can kind of like change how you're reflecting on the memory. And some of the stuff is useful, of course, but it's just a lot of this, because to your point, there's not like the relationship with speech. It's just like a hall of mirrors. This entire chapter is just, it's constantly bouncing off of yourself. Even this thing, like just kind of analyzing the arguments that against you and then kind of extracting the meaning. And it's like all the stuff is you informing what's already in your head, your own apprehension, and then just kind of doing this back and forth. And it's a lot less even than, I mean, you also have the emergence aspect of like, I'm paying attention to what emerges out of what I'm hearing, but it's still, it's interesting because it's less of like, a person is speaking to me, and so now I'm keeping an eye out on how I'm being informed. Like it's a lot more of like, what am I kind of projecting into this, and then how, like when he talks about speaking to a group. And again, I do think this is a useful tactic, but just to realize that the whole thing of I'm going to speak to a person and then watch their reactions, and then kind of meditate on that, and then switch to another person. It's like, no, I'm just looking in different mirrors with different degrees of clarity. But really just kind of looking at myself as I'm doing the whole thing. So I found that very interesting to just see that popping up over and over again the whole chapter.
Mm-hmm. And
All right, let's jump into exploration. I like that in RJ's notes, he's like, psychotherapy is not advice. Obviously, they are two different words. Yes. That was pretty. It's not a good start, Peterson. I got to tell you, Dr. Peterson, not a good start. Like, I know what he was trying to do, but the context wasn't there to do that trick at that point, in my opinion. He does sort of do this thing where he, insists that psychotherapy is genuine conversation, and it's not genuine conversation. You're paying for it. But that, to be fair, that's part of the magic. It's also an indication of a failure of society at the same time. Genuine conversation is not exploration, articulation, and strategization. Genuine therapy might be, but not genuine conversation. Genuine conversation is the fellowship in the spirit of the discussion towards a common aim, right? That's what conversation is. Like, you have to have something in common with the person you're talking to, or it ain't gonna work. It's that simple. And I think that is the magic in a lot of these little online cult groups that pop up from time to time. Rebel wisdom has come and gone, right? They all had a common goal, and then they explored it, found the extents or limits of what they were exploring, and now they're gone, right? And there might be other reasons too, but had that been a fruitful way or a fruitful frame for ongoing discussion, it would have gone on, because that's how the world is. It happens all the time. Things that, you don't know why they persist, like the Inklings. They didn't quite get along. They didn't quite agree, but they persisted. A little strange. People have been trying to reproduce that. A little strange. Things like that pop up. Even more strange. Like, it happened once, that we know of many times, actually, but most people just don't know about the other times. And then other people have been trying to reproduce it, and some of those work and some don't. Very strange, right? Also, that's how the world is, right? And so that's kind of important to notice. But it seems to me like the magic in particular is if you make a space of silence, people will project all kinds of things into that space. And some of them will be truthful, correct, and helpful to them or others. I don't disagree. I'm just not seeing this as such an interesting thing. Like, yeah, that happens. That can happen. And he does make this sort of implication of, at least it's not boring. And I'm like, you learn while bored. You memorize while bored. You do your best thinking while bored. I mean, this is how shower thoughts work. Like, I don't understand. Like, this idea that boredom is like the great evil of the world is very strange. Boredom is extremely healthy for you and enables you to do things like learn. When you're doing some rote memorization or something pedantic, actually, it turns out that you have insights. I mean, that's when you have insights. You have insights in the bath, famously, right? You have insights in the shower. What are you saying? Either way, you're knitting things together. And then maybe that's coming to a conclusion. Maybe it's mere entertainment, right? The things that you do to, quote, assuage the boredom of your body doing things over and over again, which controls anxiety, by the way. Those are the things where all the cool stuff happens. So don't be so quick to dismiss boredom. I was very, very disappointed in that implication in this particular section of the chapter. And it could be that when you're engaging in therapy, that is a filter. You've already, for some reason, been motivated to create time to care for yourself. And that's why you went to therapy. And so you're very much seeing a filtered view of the world. And it might be kind of important to realize that and not draw, we'll say, conclusions about people who aren't in therapy from your experience in therapy. Because a lot of this chapter was very, very much about a personal, private perspective in a very narrow context of therapy, with a lot of very universalizing, totalizing statements that are just observably incorrect. Which is ironic because observation is the key to assuming that the person you're listening to might know something you don't. And it's also the thrust of the next chapter, even though it's not in there, we'll say explicitly. And yet Peterson, right over his head. I didn't learn from that. I know, because he's not bald. See, when things go over your head enough, this is the result. So at least I learned from all that. Memory alone without order is simply chaos with the potentials to make for others to make order from it. And I think this is a flaw in what Peterson's saying. And I think it's a common enough issues that people don't account for. This is why things like circling are dangerous, right? Because you can be swayed. It's weird because that is in the story that he's telling. Like, he says it explicitly, that people who are disorganized can be organized very simply by pretty much anybody at any time, and that's dangerous. But that's not the lesson he draws. He seems to be indicating that you as an individual can somehow take control of that. I'm like, they're in therapy. This doesn't make any sense to draw that conclusion. The opposite conclusion is the only possible conclusion from the data you've presented, in fact. So you need to go to therapy to get help so that you do this, right? So that's something outside of you, which, again, he seems stuck on objective material reality. Well, that'll come up again for sure. So I don't know where he's getting this definition of memory, or like, it's all backwards. And that's sort of surprising. And it's interesting that he sort of indicates that the lesser good for the therapist not being wrong, even if an innocent is blamed. It sounds like a particular sin of Acedia or Acadia, depending upon if you want to pronounce it Latin or Greeky. And then he says some, like the problem in this chapter, he says some whoppers like, the multidimensionality to any situation. Yeah, any situation has multiple dimensions. Things are lots of parts at once, and many of which seem contradictory, but they're not, or they don't need to be if they're, we'll say, framed correctly. And I was a bit surprised that, he didn't dive into that, because I thought that would have been really helpful. And memory is a tool, and that was good, but it's not the past's guide to the future. It's the present's guide to the future. And there's the third thing that Peterson's missing. He's so stuck in this dialectic too, in this dualism. If you're stuck on a dialectic, you're stuck on a dualism. If you like dialectic, you're a dualist. There's no way around that. There's no way that those two things aren't the same in that way. Don't do that. Don't do that. Binary thinking is bad. You need that third thing, right? You need that present so that there is a space for undetermined but determinable action. In other words, free will. Sure, your free will is limited, but then it wouldn't be called free if it weren't limited. It would just be your will. That's how I know free will is not unlimited. Pretty clever trick, huh? I use language correctly. Something no one's doing anymore, I understand. So it's not necessarily to stop the same thing happening over and over again. I mean, it can do that, but it can allow you to discern the patterns in the world. And that means you can conform to those patterns rather than rebelling against them, for example. Another example might be avoiding those patterns, right? Oh, I drink, I wake up someplace new. This isn't good. Sure. Oh, the pattern of me drinking means I shouldn't go to the bar. Yes, that's not avoiding the same thing happening over and over again. It's recognizing a pattern that you aren't good at, or that isn't good for you, or something. And those are different things. And Peterson does interesting things in this chapter. Like, he brings up Deus ex machina. And a lot of people talk about sneaking Jesus in. This Deus ex machina is just sneaking in the hidden creator of the simulation. That's all he's doing there. And I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan. It's so easy to get this right. And you have to do so many ridiculous tricks to screw this up, like Deus ex machina. Yeah. And then, but then, again, he oscillates back and forth, right? How a question presents is a good indication of its complexity. That's right. Due to the implied framing, by the way, which postmoderns never point out. Like, if somebody says, I think I might have been raped, the thing that's interesting about that is, and Peterson does articulate this condition, he just doesn't make it explicit. Under what conditions would that be true? And what is the implication of those conditions being true? How is it that you, as the person that experienced the thing, doesn't know what you experienced? That's a very interesting thing at that point, right? And Peterson doesn't understand the due to framing part because he's still a postmodern. But how a question presents is an indication of what framing is being assumed in the question, right? Or by the way the question was asked. So that I thought was, potentially very useful. So yeah, I'm just going to pause it here and let you guys jump in, or anybody in the chat. What you got?
Okay, I'll jump in. So what I wanted to he focuses a whole lot here on memory, and I really like what you pointed out about it being the presence guide to the future, because that, I mean, it changes a whole lot, especially with the framing that he uses, and it also makes sense a lot looking at how when he talks about any type of psychological method working. I mean, that's essentially what's happening there, is that the person is informing the person in the present And then he even talks about the pitfalls of people jumping at suggestions and having false memories instilled in them, and that people are doing
Yeah.
this themselves, but also the therapists are facilitating this.
Yeah.
And so, while it is important to realize that, okay, the past in terms of your perception or your participation is not necessarily fixed. Like, it's, if you're not rooted in something, like, you're gonna get completely wiped out by, again, anyone who's, especially if you've got skin in the game, you're paying this person, you have paid them to be your authority as well.
Right.
That puts you in danger if they're not actually a competent authority. And then, of course, you wind up getting this thing of automating lies, which is something that we covered in a previous session. And as these people kind of keep on drilling further down into a memory that has been improperly instilled, I mean, at that point, you're just kind of solidifying. And then he has this nice quote that says, "People are willing to cause a lot of collateral damage in order to retain their theory."
Right.
And I mean, we see that all over the place. But something that that came up for me actually just yesterday is looking at this thing of, and if I'm looking at the scale higher than just a singular person, so you can get people that get a false memory instilled at like a societal level or at a family level or something like that. You
Right.
think of like, family grudges or something like that, or you go even bigger into these like big national conflicts. And I remember seeing something just yesterday about how, over here in the United States, there's a city called St. Louis, and it's named that after King Louis IX, who was king of France in like the 1200s. And so there was this big scandal going on here in the United States where people were going and trying to tear down this enormous statue of King Louis perched on top of a horse. And they were defacing it and doing all these things and calling him a colonizer and all of these things. It's just like, you realize, like, this was the 1200s, right? And like all of, like, calling him a racist and all these things. And it's just like, no, people were so convinced of like just a totally false memory that they were trying to take down, this 12th century French Confederate, essentially. And it's just like, what is going on? But there was an enormous amount of people who were utterly convinced, and so, I mean, this is something that, on the sort of individual, to say, almost pejoratively level, you can have that as these people that are getting false memories instilled in them by their therapists. Right. But also, who else are you outsourcing your sanity to that right. maybe you're not actually paying money and sitting in their chair, but a person is kind of informing you, and then you wind up kind of taking on these false memories and then just acting on it, and then being willing to cause so much damage in order to retain that theory, because you're not going to admit, to the point of the banner down here, you're not going to admit your own fault. You're not going to recognize the insufficiency in your...
Yeah, it's hard to even recognize it. So I want to point out a few things. So and that was very nicely done, Castle. When someone like me, for example, reads a book like this, because I know there's always three things, and when people are talking about two things, they're just wrong, I insert the third thing to extract the best parts of the book. Okay? We can look back on that and say that's an error, right? That's why I did the book club, partly, was to go, what things did I insert and think this book is amazing, right? And not that the book isn't amazing. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, what things did I insert to make the book better than the points that Peterson's actually pointing out? And how do I then take that and convey it to the audience? So to your initial point, if you add the present to his memory is so that you can fix the future nonsense, everything else he's saying in there makes a lot more sense. And if you understand a simple principle, to your almost tangential point, when you give somebody money for something, you are conveying some amount and form of authority to them. Now, that authority may be neutral. It may be the authority to trade with me. There's a neutral authority. Authority is not all something imposed from above. Right. And this is the confusion, right? When you think the opposite of love is hate, when in fact the opposite of love is indifference, right? Oh, there's three things. Yes, there's always three things. Always. There's never only two, ever. And there's no binaries. Sorry. Right? And there is, of course, a video on the Navigating Patterns YouTube channel about binary thinking. But once you add that into the chapter, all the stuff he's saying can be made better sense of, I would argue. And you might have done that sort of automatically. And I think that is where these big brain PhDs read Foucault or Kant or anybody past Aristotle that claims the title of philosopher and gets something good out of it. It's like, yeah, but maybe you were able to finagle something good out of it by inserting a bunch of framing that isn't in the author. And maybe other people won't do that, and therefore they shouldn't take those ideas seriously. Because maybe those ideas, without the things you inserted that you don't even notice, are required to make the good manifest out of otherwise bad texts. And I would make this argument, except just come here, bring your damn text, and I'll show you that you're wrong all day long. And I can do it without having read any of those texts because of the patterns. Patterns are there. Okay? If you lived a miserable life alone, unmarried, with no kids, and your quote philosophy doesn't account for children, Plato does, by the way, you have an ideology. And I can shred any ideology. It's not that hard. Any random ideology, I will shred it for you. It's not hard. I know the magic. Ooh, magic. Right? I have the secret knowledge. This is not that hard a trick. But we fool ourselves. To your point, we fool ourselves even in reading Peterson. And there's nothing wrong with, like, this is going to happen, guys. Like, we just have to be aware that we're doing that. And it goes both ways. Like, you can read a text and make it way worse. You can read Moby Dick and you can infer that it is a story about the triumph of the lesbian relationship over the patriarchy. Okay. I can do that for you if you want. I really don't want to put that much work into it, but people have done such things. So it's not like it can't be done. It may be bad, evil, and wrong or something, but it can be done. And you have to be aware that that is something that you can do. And while that may feel powering as an individual, the thing that forces you to be an NPC, right, in the world is insisting on your own individualism. Because all it means at the end of the day, all it means is that you are so confident that you're in so much control of the world that you're outsourcing a bunch of things that you're not looking at. And that's enabling you to give yourself the illusion that you are somehow an individual, which, as I mentioned, not enough times, because you can't. There's no such thing as an individual. No one has ever been an individual. No one ever will be an individual. No one ever will have been an individual. And Mosaic Arc's last episode there, that she points at, Rachel Fulton Brown does a brilliant job of pointing out where this comes from. It comes straight from Newton through Descartes. And to be fair to Descartes didn't have this problem, but also the framing sets everybody up for the alchemist who should know better to destroy the world. Because technically, that's what happened. Now we're just reporting on history at this point, right? You can argue all day long and I can go, yeah, but it still happened, right? And that's never going to change. So that's kind of the danger right there. Anybody else want to jump in before I try to continue? I have copious notes on this chapter somehow.
I don't know exactly where we are, but
we're midway through the first section, Gustavs. I can tell you exactly where, because I actually took sections down this time.
Okay. So I had some very quick thoughts about the whole talking in order to think thing, and how he kind of seems to enable it. I don't know, because he puts it in a succession of reasons why people should be talking, why people should be just talking with each other, and there's like all these different reasons. And I think one thing that he's trying to do is to defend talking as such, and another thing that he's trying to do is that he's laying out he's approaching it from the perspective that you can't really be sure why a person is talking, and that he's trying to look for ways of telling whether somebody's like playing a status game, for example,
Right.
which is one of the things that he says. And he's like, well, how can you tell? Well, you can do this, you can do that. And I think that's like I think that can be solved by um I don't know about being solved, but I don't think it has to be a problem at all. Because it can be all of those things at once, for example,
Yes.
and status isn't like yeah, status for its own sake is like maybe a problem, but maybe not. I don't know.
No,
But that's
the
one thing that
actual
he's doing.
yeah, it's a good point. The actual issue here is discernment. Okay,
Yeah.
you're giving out authority, period, because you can't cognize the world by yourself. You can't even cognize a reasonable amount of the world. Like on a percentage basis, it's not worth putting into a number. Okay, I'm sorry, but like also, you really got to understand this. You are outsourcing so much. Do you generate your own electricity? Yeah, I didn't think so. Are you like, so I'm actually part of the internet. Are you even part of the internet, or are you just on the internet on somebody else's leased IP lines? Yeah, I know what the answer is. Also, I actually own IP addresses, so it's like we can go in, right, and then that relies on a big group of people who also manage the IP addresses. By the way, it's on and on and on, right? And then those IP addresses are worthless without electricity and without all these lines that aren't owned by even by the electric company, and it's on and on and on, right? So just to do this stream, the number of people we're outsourcing authority to, right? Because somebody could come by and shut off my electricity. I've had my electricity mistakenly shut off before, totally by accident. Like that's happened, right? It only happened once, thank goodness. I hope it never happens again, but it could, right? Like I've had my internet like taken away mysterious. I mean, the internet goes down. The internet went down the other day. That's a large portion of it, right? Like these things are all outsourced, right? All of this outsourced. And when we fool ourselves and think they're not, we make this mistake. So the discernment is, are you going to take this person's as an authority about this thing? That's always the decision you're making. That's always the risk that you're calculating. If you want to know more about risk, Nassim Taleb's books are great. But this gives me an opportunity to continue because actually my next section was people do not talk.
I just wanted
think.
I just wanted to
So
sorry.
no, I just wanted to round that out. I wanted to agree with you. People do not talk to think, and I'll get into that. But yeah, go ahead, Gustav.
Yeah, I just wanted to finalize my thought, which was that since he's setting up all of these different things, he's really approaching other people and other people speaking from a place of like mistrust or like lack of trust and skepticism, and he doesn't want to give that over to other people ever, and he wants to kind of have it and be very sure about the things that he knows and that where he knew it from, and that sort of attitude.
Yeah, I think that though is a side effect of the objective materiality frame. Like that's what happens when you don't notice that Newton's psyoped your ass, and that was so good. Like I didn't even notice that until Rachel Fulton Brown pointed it out, and I was like, oh man, that's the best, because I saw the OMR, but I could never figure out where it came from. And then when she said it, I'm like, oh my god, that's where it comes from for sure. Like there's no question about it.
And it's so obvious.
It will really, yeah. You want to be embarrassed at how retarded you are? Just watch that, and you'll be embarrassed at how freaking stupid. I've been working on this for 3 years, and I couldn't figure out where I didn't care where it came from until about 3 years ago. And then I'm like, maybe we should explore where this comes from. And I couldn't figure it out after 3 years with Manuel's help and Gustav's help and Castle's help and everybody's help. We couldn't figure it out. Okay. And Rachel Fulton Brown reads one book and bang, puts it on a freaking live stream. I mean, feel like a moron. Noah, what you got for us before I move on with my lament against Peterson's insistence that somehow thinking and talking have anything to do with one another?
uh, what so he's he, often like his his writing is attempting to he's like justifying with a like an affect of size or nuance. Like true thinking is complex and demanding. It requires like something. So much of this is trying to justify an idea of what speech and intellect can do. It like presupposed a personality in his that is trying to justify its existence as its existence or a story. When he talks about memory, he's pointing towards a capacity to tell a story.
Yes.
So he's narrow. He's like he's exploring like a kind of a way to get around a pain that he has, and maybe like some of the function of his writing is to cover that. Is like Gustav's pointed out really well. That skepticism about it, that his skepticism can't go outside of him. He has to know where things come from, and his encounter is it's the question that kept coming is, what did Peterson encounter, and what else is he doing to what is he avoiding? When I originally read this, I didn't really understand that that's what was going on. I treated it almost like a conversation. Like I kind of took the premise.
Yeah. Well, and that is you know the only choice that you have. I mean, again, like, guess what, guys? Like, bought the book, I opened the book. Okay, what happened when I bought the book? Right, I acquiesced to the authority of Peterson, and you like also you have to. I mean, this is why the postmodern critique is wrong. Like, the author put all the work into writing the book, and your free will gets to decide whether or not you make them an authority. Once you've done that, you don't get to go back on that agreement and say, you know what? No, really, I know how to frame this better. Now, the implication here is no, you should take Peterson at his word. Why? The book helped millions of people. It's not that hard. Like, look at the outcome. It's fantastic, right? No, you know, the criticisms, such as they are, of Peterson are not about the utility of what he did and how good it was, these ways of framing things in the moment. They were excellent. They were perfect. They were what was needed at the time, for sure. Right. And I pointed that out before. But there's a deep confusion because of the OMR, the objective material reality problem, between conversation, story, and narrative and archetype, which Peterson mixes in his chapters all the time. If you want to understand some of these differences, there is a wonderful video on navigating patterns for doing this. I don't have the Rumble link, unfortunately. In fact, I who knows what Rumble has and what Rumble doesn't. We're trying to fix that problem. It's going to take a while. He's deeply confused about that, and he has only OMR to rely on. And I think that is part of where the thing that you're talking about, Noah, comes from, right? So I don't want to, like, if it's not deliberate, right? It's just he is exploring his own thoughts. Paul Vanderklay kind of picked this up, right? Does a wonderful job of it too. But the problem is that Peterson assumes that people talk to think. And the thing is, you mostly talk to organize your thoughts. They're pre-existing. Otherwise, you couldn't talk. I don't know why people don't know this. Very bad at sequence. Everyone's very bad at what came first, right? Probably because of the scientific dissection of the world. And then you can test if your current organization of thoughts is correct, or you can test the coherence of your communication, right? And so sometimes you know that what you're trying to communicate is coherent, and you just can't talk correctly. Now, this phenomena is extremely common. A lot of people have a point that they can make that is correct and good and coherent, but they're bad at communicating it. I won't point at anybody specific like Sally Joe, but also she's gotten so much better. It's amazing. Like in the beginning, I was like, what? But this happens with a lot of people. And we could go down the road of women are more prone to this than men, maybe for certain things that might be true. But a lot of men don't see self-reference. I think it was Castle's excellent point before, right? About people aren't seeing that the thing can't be greater than the cause. Like they're not even seeing this stuff anymore, right? And it's like, well, why are we in this situation where people don't know the basics? And that is the problem. People do not know the basics, and sometimes people are talking because they have an idea and they want to test if they can communicate that idea. And I will just tell you, most really good ideas are very hard to communicate to other people. Okay. I have spent 5 years trying to communicate intimacy crisis and meaning crisis stuff to people, and I'm still not great at it. Right. So this is not an easy thing to do for anyone, irrespective of your vocabulary, irrespective of your erudition, irrespective of your alleged education, irrespective of what a great autodidact you happen to think you are, even though everybody else knows you're a moron. Because, Muppets, and you haven't considered. And when you don't consider, you become more of a Muppet, not less, which, again, is humility first, right? That's the better lesson. And I will address RJ's question here. What's the difference between OMR, objective material reality, and standing the ship of Theseus? Well, the difference is OMR causes the problem of the ship of Theseus. There's no one in the ancient world had that question. Why? Because they weren't dividing up the world arbitrarily and then trying to put it back together from the pieces they just created. Like that never happened. They all knew why they were there. And because they knew why they were there, they knew what the ship was, that it was the ship and why it mattered. It's only in the scientific arrogance of OMR from Newton that we get this inane idea that because the material might have to change over time, that it's not the same ship. And so science can never stand on the ship of Theseus. It can only look at the people worshiping it from afar and wonder why and judge if they should or not based on their arbitrary ideas. That's all science can do because it's stuck in OMR. Anyone got anything before I continue?
Do you think Peterson does talking to himself when he's on stage? Because talking to yourself is a pretty surefire way of being crazy, actually.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that it's surefire, but I think again, see, this is the problem. I'm actually going to get into this again later, but I can address it here. This is the problem. There are people that can do amazing things in this world, And maybe some of them are rare to the point of once in 10 generations even. And maybe there is a person like that alive right now. Right? Like, okay, statistically, there definitely is, by the way, right? More than one. Okay. And so the fact that someone can do it, people confuse with, well, then I can do it. And that ain't true. I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell you, but also I will never be a forward in a basketball team. That ain't gonna happen. I'm short. I'm not 6 foot. What are you, Gustav? 6'4" or something ridiculous? I'm
So
not. No way. Are you that tall? Oh, geez. Yeah, I'm not. I'm not some Latvian Ubermensch like Gustav's. Right? Saying it like it ain't gonna happen. Right now, I also wasn't born with a trust fund, right? And so, right, there's a bunch of things that ain't gonna happen, like ever, right? They're not. They would never be available to me as the result of my birth, which I know. I think it's Heidegger calls that quote thrownness or some other stupid word. Oh, you were born. Thanks for making up a new word. I didn't need one though. This is ridiculous, and the problem that people run into is precisely the problem of not understanding that you can't do everything you see in the world, even if it's done by another person, even if you see a pattern that person is following, right? The pattern, following just the pattern, which may be all we have and might be the best that we can do, won't necessarily give you the result because you only see one part of one pattern, most likely, because that's what most people see. And yeah, I mean, Noah's pointing out in the private chat here that what Peterson does on stage is he is using the audience as extended or distributed cognition for himself to explore his ideas. This is exactly what Pastor Paul Vanderklay does. I'm fine with it. Paul's super honest about it. He's like, you all are my extended cognition. I'm using you like toys. Fair enough, right? To improve upon his work. We can have arguments about how well that works or whether or not that's ethical or whatever if you want. Like I'm not particularly interested. Maybe a live stream someday or something. But that's what Peterson's doing. And that's fine. Like I don't care. I don't care. I think it's useful. I think it's what people needed because I think, and this is what's indicated by this chapter, people have become bad at independent thought, and now they need to see somebody do something they think is independent thought better than they can do it, which happens to be somebody doing it publicly by definition, which by definition makes it not independent, by the way. Oops, right? But there's utility in that because it's an ideal. Look at this guy thinking. This is how he thinks things through. This is very important, right? So I have a video on navigating patterns. I don't have the link ready, so you can find it anyway, where I go through how I break down events. And I go through a particular event that I broke down that is related to the fall of the Fourth Estate, ironically enough, which is one of my better videos. So we get to see that in public and we get to participate with it. Like Peterson's, I think it was his first or second tour about 12 Rules for Life, but it was one of his tours. He came to Charlotte, North Carolina, which is only an hour and a half from me. So I went and I had a wonderful time. A friend of mine went with me too. I had a wonderful time at the event. It was amazing. And they did something that I thought was very unique and creative, and I wish everybody was doing right now. In fact, if I had any money at all, I would be doing this here locally. The audience was allowed to ask questions using, I think it was Slido was the app. And then a producer organized those questions and they asked the top 10 questions from the audience of Peterson on stage. Now that is a step into a participation with a group that is a step above what you get with a lecture or a mere exploration like Peterson does. That is the kind of work that I think should be extended and does actually scale very well You know, if you've got some money to invest, have I got an investment for you that really would, you know, potentially make a difference? So I think if you know that, I'm not sure how helpful it is, but at least if you know that, you know what Peterson's doing, we'll say. Okay. So anyone else before I kind of move on? I want to at least finish this section if I can. I'm not saying I can. No promises. Yeah. Peterson goes into this ridiculous narrative of his own where he says people make little avatars of themselves. And here's a problem that I don't know why these things happen this way. Here's a problem that came up the other day on the Discord server, actually about 4 or 5 days ago, where I was pointing out to someone that everybody uses the term third person perspective. They almost invariably misuse it. And no one talks about the second person perspective. And what they're usually describing with third person perspective is the second person perspective. But because everyone's doing 2 things, binary thinking, instead of 3 things, they miss the fact that there's a first person perspective, a second person perspective, which are almost always that's what they're talking about, and a third person perspective. So when I look at some ridiculously tall Latvian like Gustav's and he's yammering away about something and he's talking about some personal event in his life, and I'm like, oh, well, to me, it looks like this weird European lobster is creating an avatar of himself and then going through the process of rationalizing all the possible things he could do. Okay? But you know what's not happening from Gustav's perspective? Exactly what I described. That's not happening. That's only the perspective that the second person perspective that I have on what he's doing. Right? That's what that is. And so Peterson's just confused. He's just saying people do this. And I'm like, no, that's not what they're doing. That's what you see. But that's not what they're doing. Right? So when I go into my imagination, I don't create an avatar of myself. I put myself in the scene. That's a very, very different thing. And then I play it through. So Peterson's description is a second person perspective and is therefore wrong. And it's a common confusion. I don't blame Peterson for getting this wrong. Everybody gets this wrong. Or they refer to it as the third person perspective or some other, we'll say, common error that is unnecessary to make. Like this is not an error that needs to happen. But it is an error that happens, right? And so I think that it's important to recognize that. Like Peterson's a human, he makes errors. His descriptions are second person descriptions in a very interesting context of therapy, right? And as long as you keep that in mind, I think it's easier, right? It's easier to sort of understand, right? And Peterson goes into thinking as articulation. There are 2 different words. Like, no, articulation is the conveyance of thought, right? It's the movement of thought through communication. That's why it's articulation and not thinking. And I think a lot of what Peterson's doing is he's confusing learning the general for learning the specific. And I don't know why he's confused about these things, but he confuses it in the text. He starts confusing general and specific all over the place. And again, the only reason why that happens is because he's existing in objective material reality. And that has become a problem, right? That's become a really big problem because the way he's casting the world is incorrect. So that is the thing to be aware of here. And again, a couple of upgrades, and I think like you get a lot more out of the chapter. than you would get otherwise. And maybe when you read it the first time, you already inserted those upgrades. And I think that's super useful to realize about yourself. Like, oh, you can upgrade other people's thoughts sort of unconsciously, if you will. And also, yeah, I mean, I've said it a million times before, and it's not enough. I do think it's A, intellectually dishonest, and B, borderline criminally negligent for psychologists not to mention the unconscious or the subconscious and the role that it plays in psychology, because it is primary. And so let me just address this, Noah, and then we'll kind of open it up. Slight tangent. When someone gaslights you, they use a second person perspective. When someone talks to you, they use a second person perspective. Do you know why? Because they're the second person in the conversation. This really isn't that hard, guys. It's not that hard. If somebody was gaslighting you, you would not know that. And therefore, speaking of it in that order is unhelpful to your thought, because you're making a presumption about a present activity that you would not understand that way in the present under any possible circumstances. And that is very dangerous. Like, you can only determine gaslighting in hindsight, period. End of statement. Now, you may be able to recognize the gaslighting while it's happening, but that is the result of previous hindsight experience. And people don't get that because no one understands time, because we live in a video game reality. And it gives us the impression that we're about, I don't know, 3 trillion orders of magnitude smarter than anybody could ever possibly be. And that's actually, like, that's the big pandemic. You want a pandemic? There's the pandemic. It's the pandemic of ego. All right. So before we start the new section, the next section of this chapter, I'm never going to get through this chapter. A listening person. Does anybody have anything else? No? Okay. So, yeah. Let's see. Oh, RJ has something to say here. Let's see what RJ is saying. Middle out is a point of view, right? One which this book seems to take. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's very middle out thinking. A lot of this stuff is sort of very middle out thinking. And unfortunately, with listening, I don't think Peterson talks much about listening or the proper method of listening. I think so. His assertion is that people are looking for personal relationships and going to therapy. And I think who's looking for the personal relationship and opening up their practice to, quote, conversation? Who's the one seeking personal relationships? Right. And of course, there's a lot of instances where therapists act inappropriately, because it's very hard to differentiate those we'll say those modes of interaction, right? And so I think that's part of the problem. Is this is very much psychological projection on Peterson's part, unfortunately, but seems to be there. And Peterson makes a lot of hay about aiming properly, and I think if you aim properly and react, you're providing a contrast for people to see themselves more clearly. Maybe that's a good way to do therapy in general. I don't know. But it sounds better. Like, it sounds like a good way to enter any sort of conversation. But Peterson is doing a lot of projection, right? And communicating something to someone else causes us to project our conceptions and deal with them outside our heads, which already provides contrast, right? While being forced to consider the perspective of the listener, which is why there's a huge difference between writing in a journal and talking to your best friend about the same thing. Because your journal cannot judge you. All the judgment is internal. It's all self-referential. Right? And so I think that Peterson doesn't understand that. Right? RJ says, being precise in your speech would be very important to approach this chapter. Yeah, to some extent. I mean, I think I think that the issue for me is that when you take Peterson, we'll say, seriously, and you realize he's doing exploration, be precise in your speech is really not on the table anymore. Because exploration and precision are in some sort of conflict with one another, right? You can't be precise about something you don't know enough about. And therefore, it's a bit of a presumption on Peterson's part. So I think Peterson goes into this whole thing about you're still, when you're not talking to somebody, right? When you're sitting there, quote, listening, you're still an avatar for a person, right? You're not just a collaborator and opponent. That's bad language. Like, no, you're cooperating in a transaction or a set of actions or a relationship with the other person. And, emotional responses aside, right? And he does make the rather stunning admission at some point that a therapist is just a person. Yes, they are. And so the implication there for people who missed it is that you don't need a therapist. Like, you can substitute therapist for another person and get very similar, if not better, results every time. And again, I think part of the magic in therapy really is paying people, because you take things more. It's like paying to go to the gym. You just take it more seriously. It may not work, but it works better than not doing it, right? And so there's that third thing, right? Does it work? Does it not work? Well, it may work better than not doing it. It's, okay, that's the third thing, right? So you see that third thing pattern, and then I didn't really understand the point of this a listening person section at all. So I don't know why he sort of went into it. But anyone have any thoughts before I move on to the how should you listen, which doesn't contain any of that information?
I just thought he was trying to turn listening into something like an active activity and sort of bring it to a higher level, which may not be the right thing to do, but
Yeah, I agree. The science people are trying to raise activity, the listening to an active activity of engagement, right?
So I did not note where the sections are, so all of this will be projection, but I think that'll be on topic, so that's fine. Just one of the things I'm kind of assuming is in the part that we just went over is this thing about, he says you can be pretty smart if you just shut up. It's kind of like a little punchy line. I wish he had actually delved into this a little more, because the value of valuing silence is very valuable. He's like, I don't know really how else to kind of put that. If you're comfortable with silence and not having to fill the air so much, I mean, especially thinking like one of the purposes of this book club is to be pragmatic. The fact is that you can, one, and this is something that you've kind of talked about a lot in the past, Mark, is that if you only talk on the subjects that you know about and then just stay out of the stuff that you don't know about, then people will just be like, wow, this guy knows everything. Like, he's just so smart all the time. And it's just like, yeah, it's actually, it's really fun to also do that as well. It's just
works
like,
so well. It makes you feel bad. Like you just want to like have a shower afterwards and try to wash it all off. It's so dirty.
And it's like, and you can just be there silent while everyone's talking about stuff that you have no clue about, and you're just kind of just there looking like just kind of there in the conversation, and you have no idea what's going on, and everyone thinks you're a genius. It's fantastic. So just as a tip for the folks at home, really just value silence, lean into it. It's okay to not be talking all the time. And
I want to just boost that, Castle, real quick. Yeah, I mean, and it's a double-edged sword, right? Because so the ability to be silent for and leave a space is rare and hard to cultivate, and needs to be constantly cultivated. It's a good practice to cultivate that, right? And people have asked me, how do you measure a man? It's like, well, how long can they sit staring at a blank wall by themselves in silence, not muttering to themselves, right? And it just turns out almost nobody will even try to do that because it's that hard. You may think it sounds easy, right? Go try to do it. See what happens, right? And then you're very close to meditation practice at that point, by the way. But yeah, it's also a double-edged sword because if you allow somebody to just project whatever they want, they can also project bad things. And so there's still the discernment and the mediation of knowing when to speak. And not only when, but how, right? So a lot of people will shortcut their speech in a way where they're making claims where they should not be making claims. And more importantly, the not making claims, but saying, look, I don't know your situation, but here's what I would do or something, that is unbelievably more helpful to people in most circumstances than saying, oh, that's because of this, or oh, you should do that, or things like that. And the reason why is because you're giving them an anchoring point, which provides contrast for them to see, which gives them a way to understand where they are in relation to you or orient in the world. And then they can, right? Now, sometimes you have to do that with a claim. And I try to only make claims that are easily backed up by, well, every piece of data in the universe, because there are a lot of those claims actually. And it's odd that the quote scientists never use them. It might be a hint that they're actually morons and they're doing a lot of faith-based reasoning, which would be my argument. So anyway, please continue. I just wanted to try to make that more pragmatic if I could.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I want to bounce on the point about making the engaging with silence as a practice. I mean, that's one of those things. If you're going to practice silence in a conversation so that you can listen better and pick the appropriate times to speak, that is the type of thing that in your own off time, you should be practicing just spending some time in silence. I mean, to your previous points about, shower thoughts and these sorts of things, or you talk about like things like Zen sweeping, or even just kind of like washing dishes or folding clothes or whatever, doing that without music, and those sorts of things. Like, it's fine if you're doing it with that, but just recognize that that's entertainment. That's not the same thing as cultivating that skill. That you can wind up kind of developing these necessary attributes. And I did want to kind of also point out that thing that, it is one of those sort of conditions for getting good at meditation is engaging in that, but also, like solitary confinement is also one of the worst punishments in prison, right? So it's like how you are engaging with this. And if it's just something like, oh, I'm stuck in my own head, that's the difference between going completely insane, like cabin fever style, versus like, a hermit who comfortably lived for 40 years in the desert and then could go and talk to people no problem, versus someone that can't spend a week by themselves in a cabin or something like that without losing their minds. So that is something also to maybe ease yourself into and also be very intentional about. I mean, don't just do it willy-nilly or anything like that. And if you are going to do that, actually have some sort of structure in place, as opposed to just kind of like, oh, I'm just going to make myself do this. Otherwise, people sometimes get worse by just doing it to do it.
Anyone else before I dive in again? You're all very brave souls. I appreciate it. Yeah, how should you listen? Evaluating instead of listening is the wrong frame, right? It's evaluating instead of observing. And observing might be a form of listening, or observation might be the core of listening. But observing is letting things come to you, humility. And evaluating is imposing yourself upon something outside of you. In all cases, by the way, there's no evaluation without an imposition of yourself on something outside of you. Now, that thing outside of you might be your imagination, and I will argue that is actually outside of you, which is how you're able to be inside your imagination, because you're not inside it all the time. And so I think that's a more utilitarian way of thinking about it, or more useful or pragmatic way of thinking about it. And I think that's super important, that you do understand that your imagination is the space outside of you that gives you an interface to reality, without experiencing reality directly, so you don't kill yourself by doing something stupid that you could have thought about first. In other words, it's the open space of thinking that allows you to do safe projection without projecting directly and interfacing the world with consequences. Because once you take an action, which is always outside of yourself, there's all kinds of things that are going to happen as a result of that, most of which you'll never understand. You won't even see them, right? That's the butterfly flapping its wings and contributing to not causing the tornado, right? Because all the little bits cause the tornado, not one of the little bits. In fact, you can divide up the tornado into little bits and say one of them was the butterfly's wings flapping themselves. It's a misunderstanding of asymmetrical nature of reality. And Peterson goes into this whole recapitulation idea of your thoughts and whatnot. And recapitulation doesn't work for most people, and it isn't required. So bad news doesn't work for most people. Good news, you don't need it, right? A lot of this is just cleaning up communication. It's not some magical way of fixing a problem. There's a utility in doing that, obviously, but again, it only goes so far. And the process that he describes as summarization by definition is a consolidation, right? Doing a summarization doesn't cause consolidation. The consolidation is the mechanism by which you summarize. It's just a deep backwards way of thinking by Peterson. And I think because I'm ridiculously dyslexic, I can see these things more easily than most people. But yeah, Peterson doesn't do a good job here at all. And he goes into this whole thing about straw man, right? And that can happen, but when there's a conflict, I mean, you can lean into the straw man, but that can happen. You can create a straw man without intent, right? Just through your ignorance or lack of ability to understand or whatever. I mean, you can say like, well, Elon Musk's problem is, it's like, well, you're going to straw man the guy, obviously. And that may even have its utility, which is why I don't like the straw man argument quite so much. And this is all based in this rational world idea. And it includes only conscious actions to Peterson, but like the world is made up of unconscious actions primarily, or desires and stuff. And assuming you can know someone else's perspective is just pure arrogance. And it's not required. Like, I don't need to understand Gustav's perspective, as tall as he is, or his perspective from Latvia, to have a great conversation with him, which I've had several, which are on Navigating Patterns, by the way. And this assumption that all arguments have value. Sometimes arguments have no value, man. And that's the discernment you need. When are you talking to Foucault and listening to his stupid argument, or Kant, which is just wrong? It is wrong. Like, their core assumptions or core axioms are wrong. Why are we taking these guys seriously? Right? Because you're presuming rationality in the world, and therefore they had something to say, and therefore it is valuable because it is rational. I was like, no, none of that is true. A ridiculous way to think about the world. And why would the goal be to strengthen your arguments? Like, can't you just agree to disagree and move on like a normal person? But I don't think Peterson can, for whatever reason. He's not sort of capable of having that mode of interaction, which is, completely disappointing from my perspective. I don't know why he, wasn't able to, recognize and understand these things. So it is the deep arrogance of the assumption of rationality, and that perspectives are something you get to decide about or manipulate. And it's like, you may have some role in that, but whatever. And I think Peterson goes into this, or at least hints at this idea that you can talk yourself, you can talk yourself to yourself in a way that will be positive, and misses. You can talk yourself into doing bad things too. This idea of talking to yourself is not some solve, again, that fixes a bunch of problems. It can just as easily, in fact, more easily, I suspect, create issues. That's why conversation won't save the world, but it sure as hell will make it worse. How do I know? Because we've been doing more of it, and things have been getting worse. The correlation is kind of clear, guys. And if you just listen, the more people talk, the more they disagree. That's just like evident from observation, simple observation, we'll say. So yeah, I mean, we're going to move into primate dominant and hierarchy, maneuvers, and wit. Before we do, does anybody have anything they want to add? We're almost done with this one chapter.
I have to admit, for a chapter about listening, I actually did a lot of zoning out. Just especially when we started getting to the primate and everything, I did get kind of. I mean, I had kind of gone through this book once before, but yeah, it's a bit much,
Yeah, it's a difficult book to follow. So there is or chapter rather to follow. So there's a lot of zoning out going on for sure. I had a very hard time with this chapter. It took me a very long time to read this chapter. So yeah, Peterson goes into this primate dominance, and I was like, "What? Like, what are we doing? Why is this a factor?" And then he says, "Not all talking is thinking." And I'm like, "Well, okay, but we kind of equated the two earlier, right? To talk is to think." But now we're not doing that anymore, I guess, because primate dominance. I didn't really strange move on his part. What you got, Noah? Nothing? I think Peterson has this idea that there's a competitive form of conversation, and I will agree that those exist, but a lot of what people cast as competitive forms of conversation are just attempts to connect to people, and maybe they're socially awkward and clumsy, and that's why on September 24th we're talking about manners with Rachel Fulton Brown, and the importance of things like small talk, because that's actually how you get around the problem Peterson's talking about, even though Peterson doesn't seem to know that because everyone's got their flaws, I guess. And it could be that people cannot listen because it's too hard, or they're too stupid, or the other person is deliberately obfuscating their language or using esoteric language, or doesn't want to be heard, right? Like Eric Weinstein doesn't want you to know what he's up to. And I've got a talk on navigating patterns about his talk that he gave at ARC, where that's very, very clear. And basically, yeah, it's sort of important that people realize that some people are talking to cognitively overload you and screw with you. And I do like Young God's comment. George Lucas made Liam Neeson's character say to Jar Jar Binks, "The ability to speak does not make you intelligent. Now get out of here." Yes, and then he undermined that point by making the bumbling fool the hero, which is just more evidence that Joseph Campbell was a terror upon all reality. And yeah, so Peterson again places too much of this stuff in rationality. And just because someone's denigrating something in a conversation doesn't mean that that's a tell for anything in particular. Every philosopher past Aristotle, guys, is a charlatan. Sorry, but also I can prove it. It's not that hard. And people do not organize their minds using conversation. That's total BS. I mean, they might outsource their sanity, sure. But often with conversation, they're just, I mean, maybe they're signaling dominance, right? But a lot of times you're just trying to make a connection, right? And it's strange that he keeps making these contradictory claims in this chapter. And I don't know why. But he does understand that we outsource the problem of our sanity. We can't remain sane by ourselves. Like, we can't self-define sanity any more than you can self-identify. Right? Those two things are ridiculous. And he goes into the men and women thing, and it's like, I think he gets this partially wrong. Women do not need to fix a problem. They just need to know how to relate to a problem. And the first step in knowing how to relate to a problem is knowing what you actually, or how to order it, right? And so there's order and then story. You don't need to rise to the occasion of story. You can rise to the occasion of order. Of course, these are all steps that Peterson doesn't seem to have in his head. Fair enough. He didn't watch my video on story narrative archetype. And then understand that ordering a sequence, say even in a conversation, is below story, right? We tend to conflate story and use it for all kinds of things that it's not related to. But men in a conversation, they don't know how to relate. We just need to know how to fix problems. Og smash, og build, og stupid. And that's why there's no single person, right? We outsource our sanity. So men need women and women need men, right? Maybe directly, but at least indirectly, there's no question about it. And it's weird that Peterson claims that lectures are conversations. By definition, they're not conversations. That's why, again, different word. He does a lot of this confusion of words thing in this chapter for some reason. A lecture is a type of relationship facilitated by the language, but it is tyrannical in its hierarchical rigidity, which is required for the task that it is designed to do. You have to accept the authority and go with what they tell you and mimic that through your understanding of the propositions, because it shortcuts a lot of mistakes potentially, unless you're listening to somebody who sucks. That I can't help you with. That's where you need your discernment. Not in, does this guy have a PhD? That's bad discernment, right? And the thing is, what makes a good lecturer, which is the problem he's trying to answer or struggling with it, in this section, is only a mystery to academics because they tend towards materialism and they are enthralled by the propositional and procedural tyranny. But everybody else can just point it at a lecturer and go, yeah, that's a good lecturer, or that's a good lecture. And it's only the academics who are confused by this, which just, to some extent, just kind of cracked me up. And the fact that relating to a person in the audience works should tell you all you need to know, but clearly Peterson doesn't understand that, right? In other words, you need that personification within your engagement to be able to relate what you're saying better to your audience. Recorded video on YouTube is inferior to a talk given at Charlotte in person. And it always will be. This is the great difference that Sally Jo noticed, and I never did, between Vervaeke's Vervaeke's meaning crisis and Peterson's maps of meaning. Peterson maps of meaning are done in the classroom while he's talking to students. Vervaeke's stuff is done in front of a whiteboard while he's staring at a camera, and you can feel that. You can tell. It's fundamentally different. And you can point at all the things that it will say are missing with Vervaeke. There's no Q&A. There's no whatever. Irrelevant. Aside from that, the way he's presenting the material is significantly different. Peterson doesn't seem to understand that humor is subjective, even though he kind of hints at that. But sophistication matters a lot more in humor than you think. But we've equalized and flattened humor, and it's cost society a lot. And that's why memes are everywhere. And it's why people are making a mockery of things all over the place. I don't actually know how we chose mockery, and then it ended up in the chapter. Although, to be fair, RJ probably read ahead, and he picked the topic. So maybe that's how we ended up with it. Maybe unbeknownst to him, because strange things happen. So yeah, watch the Friday live stream if you want to know more about, we'll say the denigration or flattening of humor, because that certainly has happened. And then this last little section to round out this chapter, boy, that took a lot longer than I thought, is conversation on the way. But before I get to that, does anybody have anything they want to say, or do you want me to plow through and then you can just go from there? All right, I will plow through, as Castle has indicated. So yeah, he's dissecting conversation as though it is valuable enough to do so. And that gives me a headache, because most conversations are crap and they're throwaways, which is not to say that we don't need throwaway things. Most of the things you use most of the time are temporary and get thrown away. But that doesn't mean you don't need them. You can't devalue them because of their eventual destruction. That's how you get into denialism. So I don't know why we need to dissect a conversation now. I think that's kind of crazy, actually. And he goes into this third person perspective, but it's horrific and it's more objective material reality. You don't have a third person perspective. You're in the world, right? You can posit or project or infer a third person perspective in certain very specific circumstances, maybe if you're able to. Also, boy, there's a lot of discernment required there. And he gets into this Socrates knew nothing. That's a lie. It's an inane misquote of something very hard to propositionalize correctly. That's not what he said. That's not what he meant. I don't know why anybody could make sense of that. It doesn't make any sense to say you know that you don't know anything. Right? That's ridiculous. You can project anything into that, and people do. But that isn't any quote anywhere in any text. So that's good to know. What Socrates did was he basically agreed at some level that his level of ignorance, because it was understood by him to exist at all, made him wise. That's probably the best way to say it. And yeah, I mean, yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. Yeah, Frank Herbert's wrong usually about everything, but short-term plans succeed because they're short-term. So equating them with long-term plans is a confusion of language. A short-term plan can succeed just fine. If it's a short-term plan, it was not designed to succeed long-term. But since success had already happened before it became long-term, by definition, by the way, there's no way around that, that statement can never be true, ever. It's just confusion of language. Frank Herbert is another guilty, almost smart person, almost philosophical, but doesn't rise to the occasion. And oddly, Peterson, well, not oddly, I guess, but ultimately Peterson ends on listen to yourself. And I find that remarkably unhelpful. And it's not good. Like, it's just bad advice. It's ultimately what got you into all the troubles you're in was listening to your own advice over listening to other people. And so ultimately undermines his whole point about assuming the other person, because he actually ends this on the note of listen to yourself. Very odd move. I mean, we can forgive him. There's a lot of good stuff in this chapter. And does anybody want to say anything to round it out before I go into implementation of, we'll say, the better points of this?
Yeah, so just want to kind of respond a little bit to some of the stuff that was in the later section here. So one of the things he talks a lot about, or for a little bit, he talks about like distilling or refining the gist of a particular story or of a memory that you have. And later he talks about this thing of, he describes like a stack of dollar bills, and that if you found out that some of them were counterfeit, but not all of them, would you just throw them all out, or would you inspect them? And, there's something interesting about that word. If you've caught some of the counterfeits, it's like now the entire stack, in a certain sense, has to be in its own category of, right. If I'm going to engage with this, now I have to be extra careful, and some of it is actually going to be worthless. And so you have to kind of be aware of, if I want to extract value out of this, and yes, there probably is value here, if I just accept the entire thing, it is tainted. So I have to tread extremely softly there. And he says, he has an interesting kind of sort of statement here where he talks about, in the same vein of refinement, that talking and writing is about forgetting. And I kind of put there, photography is about what you leave out. And so this thing of, when you're refining anything, and especially even see this with like comedians when they go and they do a set at a particular place, maybe 3/4 of what they did bombed, and then say, okay, we're going to drop that, we're going to take the other stuff, and then we're going to keep on trying this. And a lot of it is just cutting, which again, is tough, because that's a lot of kind of the scientific thing, is you're just removing a bunch of stuff that doesn't work. That is also, I mean, you kind of have to do a certain degree of that, but there's also a danger of falling into this constant, you talk about like dualism, but also dualism. And he has a statement where he talks about, giving the devil his due, which I would just say for the folks at home is not the same thing as sympathy for the devil, which is like an absence of virtue. But there's this kind of thing of, if you're giving the devil his due, you're now projecting your counterpart in a conversation, you're calling the devil, basically. So it's just like, well, if you're dealing with someone who is actually that dualistic, he says, to take the time to analyze the arguments against you in your position and then extract the meaning. I don't think that it's really, if someone is attacking you, it's not really necessary to now just start giving all of your attention and your cognitive resources to looking at, oh, well, maybe they have a point. It's like,
Right.
I'm sure they're pointing at you. Of course they have a point.
Exactly.
If now the only utility I would maybe put in there is, if something actually lands and hurts, then maybe later on, when you're not in the middle of fighting with this person, examine that weakness and then try to patch that up however you can. But in that sort of sense, that's more of like giving yourself your due, of like just kind of maintaining yourself and just being better fortified for if someone is more kind of attacking you. That's not so much of like, hey, actually, buddy, like, yes, you were super rude to me, but you kind of had a point. Like, thanks for that or whatever. It's like, you might be grateful for the circumstance because you could have gotten a little better, but also, just kind of, that would be more just making the best out of a bad situation. And so I'm saying all of that to just kind of say, this combative or oppositional mindset of conversation is a lot less useful than people think it is. And maybe you wouldn't have to address those problems if people weren't constantly trying to, attack you there.
Or being competitive. Like, part of the
Right.
problem is everybody's framing conversations as ways to accomplish a specific goal where one person wins and the other person loses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he talks about this a little bit, like the one-upping people in conversation with either like a better or worse example of, especially stories and stuff like that, people trying to kind of get the edge. And that there is this point of like having skin in the game with the philosophy that you're pushing. And I think that's something that is helpful to notice if someone is being super dualistic with you. Is a lot of times if someone is attacking or mocking or doing something otherwise just kind of identifying against, that they usually are not actually that invested in what they're actually pushing. Like, maybe it might be the type of thing like we talked about earlier with a person being willing to cause collateral damage to hold on to what they have, but that's more of an attachment as opposed to like a foundation that they have. So yeah, just kind of a few little kind of tidbits there for my observations.
No, that's good. What you got for us, Noah? CC Mool. Would you believe me if I told you I found a copy of Paley's Republic in Chinese at the thrift store today? No, I never believe people on the internet, except me. Everybody should believe me on the internet, no one else. CC Mool, I suppose it's the failure of your own conversational ability if both people don't win in the conversation. I mean, it's not a win and lose situation. Like, I don't know why people have to put it in this weird binary. People, I mean, this is where John Vervaeke gets his weird dialogos nonsense from. I love John, but also nonsense. Yes, if you have any kind of relationship with another person, the potential and the aim should always be towards bettering both parties. I don't think that's winning, and I don't think it can happen for both people. I am perfectly happy to give my time, energy, and attention to giving people advice that just wastes my time and seems obvious and boring to me. And why do I have to do this? And that actually does go through my head quite often. You'd be surprised. And I do it anyway. I'm not getting anything at all out of it. Right. But I'm hoping that they get enough out of it to make my time, energy, attention worthwhile. And I'm okay with that. Like, but no other people are not going to see that sacrifice. And since I'm not trying to signal my sacrifice or my victimhood or whatever it is this week, I don't give a rat's ass. I do what I do for my own reasons. That doesn't mean they're selfish reasons. That just means I know what I'm doing and I do it on purpose and I accept the responsibility, which is going to come up in the next chapter, for what I'm doing. And that's actually important because that's one of the core, I'll say, problems. All right, Noah, you get something for us, or can I jump into implementation and then we can get to the next chapter?
Uh, sort of where Peterson like has been circling around. It comes up right at the end. He's been exploring throughout the chapter, and he seems like when he's talking about exploration, it's a conversation such as this one is where it is the desire for truth itself on the part of both participants that is truly listening and speaking, and he's been articulating conversation as a way to find truth, and this desire for a truth within the like objective or thought frame has surfaced again as an expression of his desire and the kind of the spirit of truth that's off animating him, or that he's which
Yeah, I think I see where you're going, Noah. I mean, I think there's a twofold problem that people don't understand. Peterson is saying that getting to the truth is valuable. So he's making a presumption of the value of the truth. And he's indicating that you can do that through conversation and that you should do that sort of by yourself. And I think that the sky is blue is true, but I'm not sure it's a valuable truth. It certainly doesn't help the book club. It's not valuable here and now, we'll say. That's for that's for certain, right? So is the truth valuable? I mean, it can be, but also not truth is valuable. So there's just a lot of presumption in what Peterson's saying. For me, the idea of humility, of that humility that you can engender when you enter any kind of relationship of any sort, hopefully not conversational, because those are better already types of relationships, is the key to improving yourself and allowing the other person to be improved. When you have that openness of thought and that repression of your own ego, which is very difficult, by the way, it's a struggle, then you can get more out of your relationship, your interaction, than you could otherwise. That is, we'll say, the right lesson. And we went through some of the nuggets that are, because there are great nuggets in this chapter earlier. But I think that's the main lesson of what he should be trying to say. I don't think he did a good job. And so, yeah, I mean, for me, that sort of says it all. right, is that you can engage with this chapter, we'll say, in that way, and that is a better way to engage in the chapter. So yeah, I'll just move to the next rule. Be precise in your speech. And sort of my version of that is be responsible for dragons. And that doesn't necessarily mean that those dragons are, we'll say, yours in any meaningful way. But I think it's important to be responsible for dragons. There are dragons all over the place. My dragon is not the Ukrainian war. I'm not going to be responsible for that dragon. But there's plenty of dragons that we'll say aren't mine, not of my creation, that you can be responsible for. Does anybody have any questions about be precise in your speech?
Is Peterson referring to the quality of speech with that he that he thinks is sufficient?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good observation, Noah. Peterson's really wrestling with this idea. Like, I think he desperately wants this to be true, which is why you'll notice I didn't mention speech in my upgrade to the chapter name. It's Be Responsible for Dragons. Peterson thinks that speech is a sword, which you can use from objective material reality to slay dragons. So, like, I see his confusion, and also he's wrestling with the idea of what an object is and how to properly carve up the world, because he's still very much trying to fix science, would be my answer to that question. Any general thoughts on the on this particular chapter?
I think a lot of what I was kind of getting, and I do like, I want to kind of bounce off the point of not focusing so much on speech as such, but what I was getting a lot of was, it includes verbal speech, but in previous sessions we've talked about like nonverbal communication, or I would probably just distill it down to expression. And then how you've also talked about like curating your signal, incoming and outgoing, and this sort of thing. So just, I guess a lot of what I'm kind of getting out of this chapter is modesty and participation.
Yeah, no, I like that. And actually, Young God says Peterson is referring to meaning what you say, but if you don't know what you mean, you don't know what you're saying. Yeah, well, to some extent, that is also true. It's one of the problems with this chapter. What you got for us, Noah?
That the story about the dragon was the part of the chapter which like made the stood out the most as what Peterson wanted, what Peterson was circling around. He is like when he was interpreting it, like it's a very, or as he was elaborating on it, it's a very the dragons dragon's grown to be quite large, and he interprets that as chaos, as chaos coming in. And
Right.
before that, a lot of his rhetoric it describes more how can I preserve something than become, he said, responsible for it. And you can, it's and
Yeah, no, I think the way to I like what you're saying here. I think the way to understand this is that Peterson makes very confused uh, statements about the dragon, and they're contradictory in some ways, and that can be really out of control for people, and reasonably understandably so. So because he goes off on these little explorations, he often strays from the rule at hand, and these two chapters are just prime example of him not talking about the rule again. And yeah, with that, I think I'll just jump right in. Like, the first section is called "Why My Laptop is Obsolete," and RJ is like, rapid tech progression doesn't have much to do with the social contract. And he doesn't know where this is coming from or leading to. Yeah, fair enough. I think that part of his message is that laptops are not composed of only one thing, right? Ordering requires parts to order or to have been ordered for you. And again, this is his struggling with objective material reality, right? This is, yes, you have an ordered set of parts. True. That means the thing you're talking about, the unity that you're referring to, is not just one thing because it's comprised of parts. And all objectivists, as I call them, are going to struggle with this because they don't have a way to resolve scale, which this is right. What scale do you look at a laptop or a car at? That'll come up later. And how are you correctly understanding it? And I'll try to fix this later when it comes up, because it comes up in a better concept. And he does point out, when things are not ordered, the world falls apart, which I kind of disagree with, right? When things are not well ordered, it's obvious and contrast those things that are, right? In other words, there's a bunch of stuff we only see via negativa, as Taleb would call it. Read all of Nassim Taleb's books. They're excellent to help you understand this stuff a lot better than Peterson will in some cases. The idea of systemic corruption that he brings up in this chapter is just ridiculous. It's kind of implying that the systems are the cause of the corruption. And this is counter to the idea of original sin. When a system is aimed at something other than what first organized it, the entire system becomes corrupt. But that's a different idea entirely, right? And so systems often have corrupt agents or corrupt elements within them, but that is usually mediated by the fact that there's a system. The system is designed to overcome some amount of corruption by definition, right? It's not designed to be a pure telos that can't withstand corruption, because the world is full of corruption. So it doesn't even make any sense. So Peterson doesn't really understand this. And I don't know why, but this particular section of the chapter is a little strange, because it does seem more aimed at the misunderstanding of why we examine things at a particular scale. Like, why not look at the laptop as a collection of chips and controllers that do certain functions that are also portable, and right, because why would you, right? And just because my laptop breaks, my world's not going to fall apart. Like, I'm sorry. This is not going to happen. And Peterson's going to make that analogy later on, we'll say. So anybody have anything for this section before I move on to the next sort of section?
So I guess I just want to kind of, for the folks at home, just sort of bring back, you mentioned before the whole thing of like your power being shut off at one point and these sorts of things, and just how interconnected everything is, how much it's necessary for all of these different parts, but not just the parts, but people who are constantly maintaining those parts to be working together, and how even in that sort of interaction, like mistakes still happen, these sorts of things. So he talks about, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here, but he talks about like the social contract of trust, but then also things versus useful things. And I wanted to sort of also tie this together a bit. So something that's come up a lot is this thing of like, you can make a true statement, but also things can be true, even accurate and precise, and also still be completely irrelevant or outright unhelpful. And I mean, you think of like the classic example of someone asking if they look fat in a dress or something like that. It's just like you can make a true, accurate, and precise response to that one and still be wrong. That's a very easy thing to do.
And die. That could kill you.
Right, exactly.
Don't do that.
Yeah. So, and in the same way, like, using various different tools, you can have all kinds of things. Like, this is also something I wanted to contrast, like pragmatism for, the book club is a big topic compared to utilitarianism. And these things of, pragmatism is about getting things done versus utilitarianism is this thing useful or not? And it's like, okay, useful for what? Exactly. If you're just hoarding a whole bunch of tools and everything, and then just saying like, oh, look at all this useful stuff. And the same thing, we could go to abstractions like learning as tools. Here's all this information that I have, how useful all of this stuff is. It's like, okay, that's great. But maybe you have 10,000 useful concepts, but the guy who only has like 100 useful concepts and is actually doing something as opposed to just amassing more and more stuff is going to rapidly outpace the person that just has a bunch of tools just sitting around and not participating with, people who go out and do outdoorsy stuff. They talk about like knowing your gear. And it's like, well, even if it's something like a fire starter or something super, super simple, that if you don't have any experience focusing on these particular tools and using them in different contexts, which also spreads out their usefulness a lot, then you're going to wind up being extremely incapacitated if something winds up necessitating the use of those tools in the moment. So I just wanted to kind of toss that out there here. I think that was pretty much all in this section.
Tools is the next section, but that's okay.
Close enough.
What you got, RJ?
Hello, everyone.
Hey.
I figured since my notes were helpful, I might as well add some more thoughts as I've been listening. I've just been a little under the weather, but always happy to cooperate. There's something about what a dragon is in Peterson's conception as well that is reflective in how he's approached this book, in a sense. So if a dragon is a thing that sits on top of the value that you're supposed to grapple with in order to get to some kind of value conceptually, because again, in this book, he's very much tying how we approach real life as an extension of how we cognize things and put things together. And again, cognition and confusion are very similar, and yet pointed very, cognition is pointed up, confusion is pointed down. But going back to the dragon thing and how this relates to the book is that he starts kind of with a premise, and it almost unravels from there. But in comparing this chapter that we're coming up on and the chapter that we just came out of, he starts with a premise and then it kind of he grapples with it and he tries to pull something out of that experience. And then he's doing that it's himself with this concept itself, with the tools and how I just kind of referenced it a little bit, as far as kind of seeing things as extensions of yourself, which is a functional thing you can do, but you are a part of the world and you are a part of the world, and that can collapse. Some of the sum is made up of parts, but those parts are still specifically important. So what he's done is he's flipped something by accident by saying, oh, there's always a dragon sitting on top of the value. Well, sometimes there's just value there, and by hoarding it you become a dragon. And
Yeah.
that's and dragons don't just pop up out of nowhere. Dragons are the thing that hoards the wealth and is unwilling to share it around to the point of violence. So with that, happy to go into and sit back and relax and go into a little bit of the rest of the premise here, where he said, oh, there's this functionality to the world and you have a functionality and functionality is important, but let's
Right.
talk about 6 other things here which I can grape along with with you guys for a little bit for.
Yeah.
Excuse
No,
me.
that's a good point, RJ. Yeah, Peterson very much is using or misusing an archetypal or mythological framework that's very binary. I would add, I don't think confusion is pointing down. I think confusion is pointing across, because that's what causes confusion, is looking
Fair,
across.
fair.
Yeah,
But topic for a potential live stream in the future.
absolutely. Equality and why it's a confusion of looking across or something. Yeah, the horizontal. What you got for us, Noah, before we try to plow through this chapter more?
It's the it's Peterson. So Peterson delineates he's a that what happens when you confront what happens when he confronts change, and then he he's running through what running through all of the explications of change that he can cohere into something to demonstrate or point at a pattern at that pattern. And in the he's trying to present precision, like
Yeah.
there.
Right, and he won't be able to, for reasons which I will make clear, in case it's not clear to people who did the homework. We'll say, yeah, this next section is tools, obstacles, and extensions into the world, and I think, yeah, Peterson starts from this idea, from this frame of useful things, right? But actually, we desire, and that aims and informs our sight. This utilitarian thinking is done backwards. That's why pragmatism is not backwards, because pragmatism starts from telos and works backwards. The way you're supposed to do the world, by the way. Aristotle knew this. I don't know why these people who are allegedly well-read do not know this. They should go back and read Aristotle, or listen better to Aristotle. We do not perceive some pre-existing meaning directly. We see potential and enact our desires. It's an odd mistake for Peterson as a psychoanalyst to make, ultimately, in the way he frames this. And a lot of what he's talking about are just scaling issues. And I don't like, I know that scientists struggle with scale because they assume it in their, in what they do. Um, and in sort of just talking about these scaling issues the way he does, and positing their meaning issues, he's sneaking in more creator of the simulation here. It's more Deus Ex Machina bullshit. And I don't think he knows he's doing it, so fair enough. It's just what science leads to when you're stuck in the Newtonian objective material reality. See the video I posted earlier. You can just start about an hour in. Although I'm going to go back and watch the whole 2 hours. I rather like Rachel Fulton Brown. Yeah, and Peterson talks about some of this stuff like, oh, you get overwhelmed, and I'm like, oh, overwhelmed. What an interesting frame. For me, maybe overwhelmed, a better way to talk about it is cognitive overload. And if you want to know more about cognitive overload, guess what? I have a video on that. And so you can just engage with that video. And hopefully it will help you quite a bit. So I think that Peterson's thought here is just too rambly. And he's talking about over rationalization, right? But it's like, can we be precise in our aim? Right. Because it may be just one smaller step. It would be easier for people to try. And the strange thing in this section is he segues into this strange, irrational, inconsistent rationalization for body extension outside yourself. But this just is not good for you because it leads to more confusion of where you end and other things begin. And that sort of prevents us from discerning, we'll say, proper sacrifice. Right. And then Peterson demonstrates this by saying that people sacrifice themselves for their country. That's a lie. That's technically incorrect. People sacrifice themselves for the people they love in their country. And that's just confusing the layers of reality, right? Now, the fact that we talk about the utility of sacrificing for your country is just a way to appeal to something higher to find common ground to communicate, right? And so I can say something like, oh, I'm sacrificing my time so that somebody else has a good time in the book club, right? Or I can say, I'm doing all of this work in the book club so that people I have never met and will never meet might benefit. Right? One's a higher aim. The other one may not be relatable to you. Right? Because if I say, well, I'm doing all of this for Castle, and you don't know Castle and you don't care about Castle, which you should, by the way, then it doesn't have the same impact as if I say everyone. Why? Because everyone includes people you know and care about, and Castle may or may not include that. So you see, this is where Peterson doesn't understand how language works. Not just him. Most of the science idiots don't understand how language works and what it's for because they confuse it with thought, and they don't understand it's related to, we'll say, the flattest, poorest form of communication available. Notice that I'm using my hands. So as not to be too flat. And that's how he gets to this confusion. And it's a deep, deep, dangerous, in my opinion, confusion.
If I could bounce that ball for a second.
Sure.
I think this ties back to some of the comments you were making earlier about you being the third thing when you're reading a piece of information, an article or a book in this case, and being able to, uh, through contrast, see what you're able to realize or what you may have already known by interacting with that. Um, which kind of brings me to my thought from this part of the book, which is that he could have been a little bit more precise by explaining that what he's really trying to talk about in this section is the infrastructure needed to engage the world on a certain level. At least that's what the theme is in this section. But the thing he's really trying to talk about is perception per se. And all the
Right.
things he brings up was then current understandings of how perception works, and then he's trying to translate it into the story, and then he has this methodology which he finds relatable from his lecture series. And as we mentioned last, or as someone mentioned last session or a session or two ago, this reads a lot more like a compilation of those lectures. And when you have all of that as context, then you can start pulling out certain things like, okay, just because humans work on this functional level, or work towards what is most functional and what works, doesn't mean that's how the rest of the world works. And he's missing that asymmetry.
Well, but it's way worse than that, RJ. Just because a description of a bunch of things you see fits what you see doesn't mean it has any relation to how it works at all.
Exactly.
That's
And
the
and,
bigger
and one of my
problem.
favorite quotes is actually from Jiddu Krishnamurti, not to be confused with J. Krishnamurti, which is that the description is not the described, and that the map can never be the reality.
Right. Yeah, and so yeah, I mean that's really that section on tools, obstacles, and extensions into the world, and why, other than he's a crazy leftist, you would want to point out to people that when you grab a screwdriver, you can feel through the screwdriver, and therefore, I don't really know. And Young God, I didn't read the chapter. Well, maybe you shouldn't comment. But I think Peterson's trying to say be responsible for those whom you piss off. No, I don't think he's saying that at all. He doesn't have a sense that ever happens. Peterson's framing is never that he's actually done something wrong that then needs to be mitigated. He may posit from a third person perspective, or rather a second person perspective, and it does vary. He uses both. That if you did something wrong, you may need to do that. But he never puts himself in that position. And so he's always imposing, and it's his book. He's allowed to impose. And you read it, so too bad. But also, it's good to be aware of that particular error, which a lot of people, when they read, actually make. Not an unusual mistake, which is to say, missing the faults of the author in their authorship, not in what they're saying, but in their framing. And this is where the postmodern critique seems to have some value, but actually does not have any value at all. It's pure evil. Don't do it. Anyone have anything else for this section before we move on to the world is simple only when it behaves?
Yeah, I think I just want to add a little bit more to this thing of like not knowing where the person begins and the world begins, and just kind of delineating those things. I mean, so there's a point that I made a while back in the Language of Creation book club about the word like. And I'm not going to try to enforce this for common use now or anything, but the word like was used very differently than how it is now, where, now we'll say, oh, I like this or I like that or whatever, but it used to be understood within a context of hierarchy. So you would look at if something was above you, if it was like a structure that you're participating in, then you could say that you liked that thing. But if it was something that was beneath you, then you would refer to it as liking you, and it doesn't actually imply agency, which a lot of times is kind of how we refer to these things now, as if there's something that is consciously making a choice, or there's something in its personality. Yeah, and it's kind of understandable where you have this thing of like flattening things down because you have to, because you're drowning in a flood of complexity. I get why people are doing this, but I do think it's useful to understand that, if someone said, oh, I like the color red, like that would be actually kind of insane. Like that would kind of imply that, oh, everything I own is red. back in the classical context versus
or,
like
or that you own red because it's
Right.
underneath you.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's all right, Kessel. That's such a good point that I actually want you to take that as a note and remind me when I talk to Rachel Fulton Brown September 24th to bring this up, because I think that might be the primary differentiator between medieval thought and we'll say recent thought. There's no such thing as modernity.
Just to add on to this little piece, because I do think it is valuable. The way that language transforms, I'll give just a quick second example. The word nice or the word neat. Today we use that as like, oh, that's very nice, or that's very neat, to express kind of a positive affect towards whatever's being shared with us. But nice used to mean and originally meant ordered, and neat also used to mean uh, in line or to be straightened out. So the
Right.
way that some of these things change, and today we talk about it as the colloquial use of the language versus the precise use of the language, or how a dictionary or academic might expect you to use a word is different than everyday speech, is also a challenge towards being precise in your speech.
Yeah.
And it's also a challenge towards listening accurately.
Yeah.
At the same time, going back a little bit to what was said in the
Good.
last chapter about Rogerian listening, which is active listening in a sense,
Right.
which is
We'll
it's not
get
something
in.
you can merely do
We'll get into that.
just by intention.
We'll get
Right.
into the
Yeah,
framing problem.
certainly.
Yeah, we'll get into the framing problem later, for sure. Castle, did you need to finish out your point? Because I know I interrupted you before we
just a
moved to
couple
Noah.
of just a couple of quick things. But before I do, just a comment on nice. That word has gone through so many changes. So it did mean like neat and tidy and everything until now it means something like pleasant. But like the earliest version of nice meant stupid. And so it went through a lot of changes. It went from stupid to then fussy, then to ordered, and then now pleasant. It's very interesting. But yeah, with the thing of like, the like is actually a composite of two words that mean something like body together, and that's why I brought this up. So if a person said, "Oh, the color red likes me," or "This dog likes me," or something like that, is that it is suitable for me. It fits with me, or there's kind of like an overarching category within which I participate. So in Russian, they have a really nice, like you can say "I have" as if I have in my possession, like I'm holding, but you can also say "u меня," which means at me.
Right.
And so that is a very common way of referring to things, is that at me there is, and it's within the sphere of my influence or of my existence, and that's a lot closer to kind of like the more medieval understanding.
Like would be something you can relate to,
Mhm.
as opposed to something that's out there that might be relatable or relates to something that isn't you.
Yeah. One other thing, actually, I wanted to add. So similarly to this, I guess also to the body together thing, he has this quick thing that he mentions about testosterone levels changing based on like viewing sports and stuff. And this is actually something I've seen, like some of these gym bro guys go, and they notice that if you watch like a Schwarzenegger movie or something like that, like you can actually have like a measurably increased testosterone level just by watching that. So some of these guys will kind of do that. So you have these guys that will go and they'll almost use, and I just think this is really important for like not knowing where you end and other things begin, even things that aren't physically grabbable.
Right.
These things can have a direct impact on your physical existence, and so these guys
Right.
will almost use an action movie like a bodybuilding supplement. And and so you can understand it in kind of a silly, like, okay, yeah, these guys use this to their advantage, but also one, maybe not everything that you're getting out of that is all going to be super beneficial, but also just how much you can be affected also by the things that you yourself are possessing or affecting in the world.
Right. Well, that's the mimicry thing. And Noah, just before I move on, I want to Van de K. Peterson implies the being of a laptop not only depends on things it relates to, it definitely doesn't, but that its being actually extends beyond itself. No, laptops don't have being. Peterson is confused. I agree that he implies all of this. Not saying you're wrong, saying he's wrong. That's dumb. The existence of the laptop depends upon us not only being as creatures, because we build laptops, they don't build themselves, but it also depends very heavily on our desire or passion for the utility that would be offered by a thing that offers the utilities that a laptop offers, right? So laptops are dumb. I'm using one right now, by the way. Except if you're using them to work outside as well as inside, which I do, work while you travel, which I do, right? Desktops are inconvenient, right? Then they're useful, especially once they got, once the chip density increased and you could actually do desktop work on a laptop. I have a gaming laptop. Why? Because I'm cold all the time, so I run my office hot. So if you run your office hot and you're not doing top-end gaming, which I definitely am not doing, you want something that cools itself extra well. How do you get that? You buy a gaming laptop. See how that works? So why does Mark have a gaming laptop? He doesn't do any gaming, and he almost never does PC gaming. Well, there you go, right? Because I happen to know a bunch of things. This is my field, after all, and that's how that works. And so, yeah, Peterson's just wrong about that. RJ, must you?
Yep.
Before
So I think
go?
is my connection not so great?
No, you're fine.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think all these are great examples of how I would put it as you are part of the world and a part of the world, and not specifically you are not apart from the world. And then separately, there's issues of projection.
Right.
But with that said, I think that really is about as much as we can dig out of this first little section here, at least for me.
Yeah. Noah, what you got before we move on?
I thought Castle's point to liking unflattened, where right back out of the flattening that's done by Peterson. There's analogy here is operating through thought that doesn't know where the boundaries that boundary is. One of the things that's the strong, like in say Peterson's concept of speech is really thought as he's using it here.
Yeah, he's been explicit about that. Yeah. When he said speech is thought, like just matter of factly, which I disagreed with. And then he goes into this craziness around the world is simple only when it behaves. The opening premise of this chapter is wrong. People do this all the time. The thing that's hard for people to do is to dissect things in a way that makes sense. And this is kind of the psyop of this idea of deconstruction, is that your world falls apart and then you have to put it back together. No, it doesn't. The idea that you're able to coherently take apart the world and then make a new world from it, and then that world blew up, and now I'm back to, I've gone back to church as a common one, right? I deconstructed from religion. It's like you talked yourself out of religion with your logic, reason, rationality, even though you were wrong about that, and now you have to go back on that and fix it. Oh, you're my hero. Like, why are we being nice to these retards? Quite honestly, like, I get it. You destroyed your own world, and it caught up with you eventually. And now you have to go back to the world you had because you had cut out too much, because you thought you could cut anything out at all and you knew what you were doing. But that was just a fundamentally bad principle. And people
I'm
make
just going to
that
offer a
mistake all the
tiny
time.
little pushback,
Go ahead.
and that's just calling people retarded over this. Um, I get where I think I get where you're saying, but I don't know if it's an issue of a lack of capability or being slow, and necessarily, especially as much as we've realized that a large part of where some of the critiques that have been shared are coming from are from a framing perspective.
Right.
So I don't know
Whether-
whether if you know what side of the IQ bell curve you're on is really
They're
going to change
slow.
that.
No, they're slow. They're slow in two ways. They're slow in the idea that they can do such a thing. Like, who are you to deconstruct the world? Did you create the world? Do you know anything about who or what created the world? Right. So that's already, you're a little slow. I'm
All
sorry
right,
that
as long as we're being precise in our speech,
right.
that's
And you're
the only
also
thing.
slow. You're also slow in recognizing that the world fell apart. Like, that's the two ways in which you're a little slow. And fair enough. I mean, that's why you need the previous chapter, the humility, right? To recognize that the thesis that you've already operated on under is insane and ridiculous and can't possibly be true. Like, you didn't create the world. You don't even know who or what created the world well enough to critique the world, much less dissect it. And that's the problem. That's the problem. In science, very much sort of tells you that you can, and see the Mosaic Arc video from earlier. Noah, you get something before I try to plow through this?
That so met I think the the negative examples that Peterson continues to bring up here, like he's talking about a loyal and honest wife and infidelity, are all come through taking on responsibility for the brokenness,
Right.
and that he's encountering, and like a simple world is a world where where bad things don't happen, right? The simplicity, so and just he finishes off the section with, he's brought, there's a downness there, and then at the end another appeal upward, or everything is intricate beyond imagining, everything is affected by everything else, and he's just spouting things for their spouting it for its emotion, for its affect.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good observation. I mean, I will get into all that. Don't worry. I mean, at least he does at least state there's no objective material reality here, which is nice. But then he acts as if there is. So it's a performative contradiction, unfortunately, right? He goes into this example of cars and what they are when they break. And like, the obvious answer is to just call somebody, which he gets into later, right? But then he takes this odd turn where he tries to justify psychologists as mechanics. And I'm like, psychologists are not as useful as mechanics. And you can't treat the psyche like a car with parts that can be repaired, right? That's lunacy. And this is inference versus observation right here in this example. Observing the world, I don't care how, It actually doesn't matter. Mechanics make more money, they help more people, and they are better people on average than psychologists, and there's more of them. So there's a larger sample size for this. Sorry, equating those two seems like just ridiculous. And then Peterson almost somewhat redeems himself in this section with trade-offs. The complexity doesn't change, right? It just moves from one place to another. So perhaps your car isn't broken, right? But somebody else's house has a water leak. Complexity of the world doesn't really change. The brokenness in the world doesn't really change. It's just what comes into your view and out of your view. Some of that is your perspective and the function of your ignorance, by the way. But your perception is important here, because your perception can increase the overall number of things that are wrong. For example, you could drag in foreign wars into the field of your perception, and suddenly everything in the world gets more complicated. The world didn't change, though. Nothing changed for you as a result of the war in Ukraine. Sorry. So your perception has a lot to do with this, and Peterson doesn't seem to understand any of that, which is unfortunate. So it's weird too, because there's a way to read the rest of the book where he does understand that perception matters, or even the rest of this chapter, but he clearly doesn't understand that whether or not you see the order in the world is partly, if not mostly, a function of you and not a function of the world. Like, the world doesn't fall apart. And I think he's just playing too fast and loose with these. And that's a real problem, right? It's a deep confusion, much like we'll say the confusion that Jan God has for effect and affect, which is too bad. But yeah, he then goes into this next section of, you and I are simple when the world behaves. So he kind of makes the same mistake again at a different layer of analysis, to use his own terminology. So Peterson claims, for example, that the wife seeing her husband of 20 years or whatever with another woman, in a situation where it would be difficult to rationalize and ignore, some behavior, but people do it all the time. I, in fact, have done that very thing in the past. And I think the issue is that Peterson is assuming rationality here. And part of assuming rationality and objective materiality is this idea of emergency, right? Where he makes this horrible pun, to RJ's point. Emergence is usually bad. That's why it's called an emergency. So I don't know why the people who are emergence is good, or talk about emergence as though it's good, are saying that. It's almost like their language skills are very low. Also, their language skills are definitely very low. They're really not able to think this through and comprehend how language is used. Emergency is not good, guys. But it is emergent. It should have been a hint, and I guess the people using it the other way didn't get the hint somehow. I don't know what to make of this stuff. I'm like, you're highly literate and your comprehension is terrible, and I do have a live stream about that. But also, what's going on? What trade with the devil have we made to put ourselves in this particularly gnarly situation? And he's got this bleak interpretation of these life collapses that are completely unjustified. The woman in the relationship with the cheating husband might be perfectly safe so long as she doesn't confront her husband, but lets him have his dalliances. And the thing is, this is commonly discussed. Like, this has been discussed on radio talk shows. It's been discussed online, right? People have justified cheating as a good thing. I've seen it within the past year on the grounds that I'm saying, right? There's no need to turn this into some Nietzschean existential crisis, which is what Peterson does. And so I'm just like, I'm flummoxed by this whole thing. It's bizarre that he frames things so negatively to Noah's earlier point. Vandeke is Peterson confusing the models of the world which we each have in our minds with a model of reality, how much emergence chaos is real and mental. Peterson is oversampling psychological examples from his private practice and using that as his example for everybody in the world, no matter what. Probably because he doesn't have a lot of friends. That's my guess. Yeah, a friend of mine years ago, I mean, I've talked about this before, but he basically said, Mark, this is going on. You have to deal with it. And I went, freaking A, you're right, I do. And then I had to take a bunch of steps and throw somebody out of the house. And it was a mess. But I had to do it. And I should have done it. Maybe I should have done it sooner. But it destroyed an entire business, right? It wrecked a friendship. It was bad. It was bad. But people are very good at ignoring things. And Peterson doesn't seem to account for that. He just assumes that rationality means that they can't ignore things. And I'm like, rationality doesn't prevent you from ignoring anything. Have you met you? Right? Like, there's a lack of self-awareness here, for sure. A total lack. Which is unfortunate. Because you want the best for Peterson. Right? He's helped a lot of people with his book.
To be a little bit fair to Peterson, going back to some of my earlier comments, this book really is a compilation of his really kind of going back and revisiting some of the topics that he had been talking about for quite some time. And I think trying to distill that into a book form. But that allows me to bring in some of the way you refer to things as through the age of gnosis and the flattening, and what the case study of Miss S brought to mind for me was what you, Mark, might describe as having a flooded situation, and that being under the auspices of be responsible for dragons. There's, I don't feel like doing the whole Peterson thing about Tiamat and water and dragons,
Yeah.
although I guess I just kind of did. But the whole point about having a flooded world means being, what do you do with that kind of thing? Well, you try to be responsible for each of your dragons, and you might start with the small ones. Sorry for my stutter, and work your way up. But that being said, it is very much a small set that he's drawing from, almost anecdotal. And if you kind of give him a little bit of leeway for that, and you can still see what he's trying to get at there.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have to give any leeway. Vandeke, I mean, is the feeling the world falling apart purely psychological, like with revealing of the affair, or is it part of the world actually disintegrating in that case? There's no objective material reality, dude. You're responsible for holding the world together in a way that holds the world together. And so if the world is going poorly for you, hold it together differently. This is be responsible for dragons. People are not perfect. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the advice to ignore the affair is bad advice. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's good advice. It might be either. I don't know your circumstances. Framing matters. Some people, they're going to sleep around. They may also be the people that need the marriage the most, because without the marriage, they would completely fall apart. I don't know, but the evidence I have says, of course, you moron. Maybe you don't have that evidence. That's fine. I don't care. I'm just saying, don't be so quick to judge on one side or the other of that particular issue. Because it's not a clear thing. And these imperfect solutions are only possible, as I alluded to earlier, when there is a system in place. In order for any system to exist, someone, hopefully more than one, has to be responsible. You can start with one person being responsible and then move to other persons being responsible. If you don't understand this concept, coming up soon next month sometime, you can read about it here. With Castle's excellent encouragement and editing. Noah, what you got for us before I move to the next section here? Nothing?
Uh,
Something?
Nothing. Nothing.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, Vanticate, look, you can put the world together all kinds of different ways. So you better do that deliberately and carefully. That's all. If you put the world together as a place where you can live in your mom's basement, eat your Cheetos, and play video games all day, that will work for a very long time, because we live in material abundance right now because Newton's a jerk. See the video link to Mosaic Arc I posted earlier. I mean that technically. I'm not trying to be cheeky here. I'm telling you, no. It's exactly how part of this age of gnosis problem came about. Maybe that's the solidifying agent that I've been looking for the age of gnosis, where knowledge is the highest value and expressed as propositions, because Newton certainly made that mistake. From alchemy of all the places to make the mistake. All right, let's move on, because I have way too many notes as usual. Yeah, I mean, things only fall apart when we let them, right? When we disengage from the struggle of holding relationships as such together. And sometimes this is how depression works, right? I mean, it can just negatively valence all your relationships, or you can be depressed by recognizing all of the struggle that is, we'll say, not optional in the world as not having any upside. Like, that is a possible mode of depression. It's not a good one. I don't like it. Peterson encourages this somehow in the way he's talking about this. And that's a problem. Peterson's very, very negative. But you can just reorder the world. And that message is sort of in there, I guess. We'll say it's not in there very well. Right? And I think that's part of the problem, is that Peterson's negative view of the world doesn't properly highlight what you can do in terms of positive view of the world. And that's part of the problem when we don't know what we're looking at, right? When we don't see, we'll say, all the components of the world in an ordered fashion is probably a better way to say this, rather than what do we see? We don't know what we're looking at. Like, we don't see anything most of the time when we don't know what we're looking at. But that's a very different statement. And Peterson doesn't seem to have a sense of that. But when things collapse, our perspective just narrows, right? Our perception of the world narrows. This is that reciprocal narrowing that Dr. John Vervaeke talks about. And that's how alcoholism and drug addiction happens most often. Somebody loses their job, they become an alcoholic. It's extremely common. Right? Someone gets kicked out of the house, they become addicted to heroin. Extremely common. And Peterson should know this, right? We tend to shut down and not act, not become creatures of pure action when things fall apart. I don't know why Peterson got this backwards, but he got it back. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, where are you getting your data from, bro? It's definitely not the norm. The norm is for people to shut down. There are exceptions, and some people, when they're in crisis, automatically start taking actions. And often that makes things worse because they don't take time to be bored and think about things. But that's a different level of engagement, we'll say. And look, most people do not question themselves the way Peterson sort of implies here. The presumption of self-awareness and this negative valence and the justification of negative emotion through chaos rather than other means. I mean, he kind of hints at this in Maps of Meaning more often. Like, sometimes you have a problem in the world that just needs to be solved. Like, you don't have a job and just need to get a job, right? Or you don't know how to feed yourself and you just need to get to a food pantry. Like, those are problems that can manifest also psychologically, because I'm gonna give you a little hint. I know no one's probably mentioned this to you, but all problems that you perceive in others manifest in the psychological frame. Also, psychology is evil because it does that trick to you. Not all problems are psychological, and differentiating the two is important, because at the end of the day, if somebody has a psychological problem, the odds that you can fix that are very slim. The odds that you can make that worse are very great. And so if you know if somebody has, like, a beggar on the street wants money to buy a sandwich, and instead you buy him a sandwich, you bring him the sandwich and he slaps that out of your hand. That's very common, by the way. Then at least you know he's a liar, and at least you know you tried. Now, the fact that he doesn't eat the sandwich and that he's a liar doesn't take away from your score points for trying to help somebody, right? That's why I'm always confused when people say, well, you did this thing, but you have a YouTube channel, you don't have 1 million subscribers. I'm like, yeah, but I don't necessarily want 1 million subscribers. It's not my goal. Yeah, but you're not helping all the people you could. And I'm like, well, maybe, but I don't know how many people I can help. And maybe I am helping all the people I could. And my failure to help all the people to your standard does not diminish my my accomplishment in the world at all. And so, like, in fact, my inability to accomplish my own goal doesn't diminish the things that I do accomplish at all. I still get all the points for the things I did right. So the fact that there are things that didn't go right doesn't take those points away at all. Sorry. There may be other things that take away those points, but within that frame, that never happens. And people will talk like that quite a bit to you. And this is that negative emotional valence of the third person perspective judge that Peterson seems to, or psychology in general, encourages. And it's a very negative thing for society. Psychology is a pox upon the planet and should be eradicated as soon as possible as a way of thinking. That's sorry. Just, I hate to break it to you, but also not to say you can't use it or use it fruitfully, but the fact that we use it on others is a real problem. And before I sort of continue with, I think we're still in that section. We haven't gotten to the reprehensible sections at the end of the book yet, the last two. Oh, CC Moole. Points, but not winners and losers. Sometimes there's winners and losers. Right. In a game, what determines the winner and the loser? The points. How is that determined? Not the same way in all games, by the way. Right. And so, sure, points can be related to winners and losers, but it can be apart from winning and losing. Winning and losing is a binary. You don't need to think in the binary. And this is why people say, look, you didn't accomplish your goal. Like, you should be sad, or what's wrong with you? And I'm like, yeah, but I got points and I'm still Like, I still have those points, irrespective of the accomplishment of the goal, right? And the reason why it's dangerous to think that way is because if you think in terms of winning and losing, and you can't win or you don't win, you have to default to being a loser. But the fact of the matter is, the guy who does something in the world is not a loser compared to the guy who does nothing in the world. Those are the bigger losers. They're not the only losers, but they're the bigger losers. And that's actually way more important. This is, again, there's a third thing here. Super important to understand that there's always three things. And you got to find the third thing. Because most of life exists in the neutral space. Most of life exists in the third thing. Right? Most of life is accumulating some points, but not all of the points. Right? When I only sell, 250 copies of my book ever, I'll still have 250 copies sold. And the fact that I didn't become a New York Times bestseller does not mean I lost anything or didn't accomplish my goal or any. That's not what it means. It means I got 250 points. Also, not the best way to think about it. But if you must think about it that way, at least acknowledge, right? All the people who wrote no books and sold no books get no points. I'm still ahead of them. I'll take that win. See how it works? It's not a magical thing, right? It's not sort of that hard, right? Okay, let me see if I can push through and ever finish this chapter. For a short chapter, there's a lot here. He talks about this cat dragon thing, this story, but this small dragon, growing into a big dragon sort of thing. But I think he misses the real points of the story, or we'll say the best points of the story. And that's too bad. It's a shame. I think there's way more to be learned by that story that's way more important. And Peterson doesn't get into it. If you want, we'll say me to get into it, that would take a whole live stream or something. And leave a comment, and maybe you can convince me to put in the time. But otherwise, I ain't putting in the time because I got plenty of other stuff I want to do, including got to sell my book. So we gotta get on that and rebrand my channel. So, although I couldn't find it in the book when I reread the chapter 3 times, not the chapter, but a couple pages. He talks about sins of omission, right? But there's ignorance, willful blindness, cowardice. The world is attention and requires attention. And when you pay attention, you are taking a form of responsibility. And when you pay attention to dragons, you are taking responsibility at some level for those dragons. Right? And so that's important. Right? Because the goal for you and for everybody really should be to be better, because the world needs you, right? And if you're better, you'll make a better world. So that's actually fantastically important in terms of dragons and we'll say responsibility, which I think is the better message within this chapter, even though it's not what Peterson thinks the chapter is about. It's interesting, though, like he mentions living things die without attention, right? Indeed. I mean, as Jonathan Peugeot says, the world is attention. So it matters what you care about, what you point to, what you aim at. Like all of those things are important. Why Peterson doesn't go into that better, I can only speculate. But Peterson does give the formulation, although he doesn't sort of frame it correctly. He goes into this land of maybes, what might have beens, and it feels very satisfying, but it's fantasy. But then he leaps into this frame where you could interpret it as avoiding the struggle of fighting entropy results in the decay that eventually leads to collapse. And that is a good way of thinking of the cat dragon, right? Dragon starts out as small as a cat and then grows over time. And that actually, I think, is fantastically important. Um, it's unfortunate that Peterson doesn't do a better job and doesn't recognize, we'll say, his own flaws with what he's saying, his own contradictions. Uh, he seems to do a much better job when he's talking to students in a classroom. Also, he's an excellent teacher, so that should surprise exactly 0 humans. A lot of what he's saying is good for opening up new perspectives, but bad for specific pragmatic advice, right? So he's opening up the possibility that you could do more than you know about, but he's not resolving anything because, again, should the woman's world collapse because she finds out her husband is cheating? Or maybe that's what keeps her safe, and pointing it out will lead to a divorce. I don't know, but at least I'm open to both possibilities. Are you? Right? Uh, the idea that you take on a small hurt now to avoid a larger dragon later is true. But, again, he goes into this whole thing about life is suffering and life is struggle, not suffering. And then he devolves into you must articulate things in order to transform. And that's wrong. That's just completely ridiculous. It can certainly help. And I know why someone who's done psychology and therapy would think that that were true. Because in psychology, that happens all the time. That's when you have been, quote, successful. But Peterson desperately wants the points, by the way, for the 4 or 5 visits that the woman whose life was completely a mess might have granted him, but she never finished. He wants those points. Right. But he also sees transformation as the goal and the success criteria for therapy. And I think that is insane. And all of this points to the trick of precision that he's playing on himself, we'll say, in this chapter, which is all this what if. What's precise enough? Like, what meets the standard of precision for what you're doing? Because that's all you need. You don't need to be precise to some objective material reality standard. That's insane. I don't know why he sort of gets into that. And I mean, that leads us to the construction of the soul in the world. So before I jump into these last 2 sort of sections to round out the chapter, does anybody have anything to add up until this point when I really dive in and get angry?
No, I think we agreed to skip over the Yeats poetry bit.
Yeah,
Not really worth going into.
it doesn't work well with pragmatism or with how Peterson's framing things. Like, again, I think, if you watch the knowledge engine model video on navigating patterns, you'll realize a lot of the people that are helped by a book like 12 Rules for Life do not have the ability to engage with poetry correctly. I mean, this is just finding all over the place. You can just look and see that that's a big problem. So from a pragmatic standpoint, I didn't even find the poetry particularly useful, and I have no problem with poetry. So
Yeah. On to a brief mention of the soul, wheat and chaff, and then I think that'll do it.
yeah, Castle, you get anything before I dive into the worst parts of the chapter at the end?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he just he goes over a few of these things, and I'll probably save some of this for kind of the reflection at the end. But just a bit of the stuff about, resentment piling up and corruption grows if no one acknowledges it. I want to kind of tie that together as well with the whole doing nothing assures defeat thing.
Yeah.
I mean, for as long as we're being pragmatic, just for the folks at home, just this thing of always kind of putting in that extra bit of effort, to your point, being better so that the world around you is better. When I was talking previously about something at you, liking you or suiting you or something like that, if you are maintaining the stuff around you and those things, if you were the type of person that is cultivating the things around you and the things around you are well cultivated and maintained, then that's going to start having more of an influence on the people who happen to sort of overlap in your, or maybe
Right.
your bubble sort of overlaps with them. That's going to have an effect. And you can contrast that with, he uses an example of someone that has like the pleasure of martyrdom. This person that doesn't want to take responsibility and yet wants to kind of, in a certain sense, get the points without having earned them or without
Right.
having done some sort of participation, and let other people sort of give them their, what is it, the universal basic income, I guess, of like, warm and fuzzies. So, having that, and then also this thing of convincing yourself that you love peace when you avoid conflict that is actually necessary. And there's a lot of this danger of a person that maybe even esteems themselves as a pacifist, and then watching their own environment and the people around them actually become much less peaceful. And it's just like, no, you just like not taking actions in the world. Or you like not risking potential blowback on things or risking conflict, when a lot of times it is extremely necessary to even have, as we've talked about in previous sessions, maybe even having the people that you care about who you're correcting or assisting come at you, in opposition, because they're experiencing, in a certain sense, and as we'll get to later, they're feeling judged, or they're feeling their own inadequacy, or their own kind of seeing themselves reflected in their own behavior. So, just being able to take on that responsibility yourself also helps demonstrate that for other people. And maybe as you're sort of, as they're within your sphere of influence, without you having to chastise or correct them, that demonstration might be a nice little way of helping those people to mimic you without the direct interaction potentially making them feel judged if they're so, sensitive, and maybe, it doesn't seem prideful, but it still is, even if the person doesn't seem to be arrogant.
Right. Yeah. Or the pacifist who brandishes a knife and threatens you on a live stream, which you can see if you want. Didn't do it to me, but also pacifists are unbelievably dishonest. Pacifism is not a thing that you can have in the world, because then you can't take action. Because basically any action is violence against something. Still, you're not a pacifist. You're just lying to yourself. And I think, yeah, a lot of this is lying to yourself. And Van Takei, yeah, does the application of the rule of this chapter, well, on the previous rule, say the truth or at least don't lie? I think that they're related in that Peterson does not do a good job, because he can't, of making definitions clear. Right. What does it mean to say the truth? Well, you'd have to discern a bunch of things. And how would you discern lying? Well, you need to discern it in relation to the truth. So you have to discern the truth first before you can discern a lie. In the Petersonian sphere, in my sphere, you don't have to do any of that. You can tell lies independent of the truth. But that's because I have a third thing, and he doesn't. And that's why, right? And so this is the same thing. Be precise in your speech. In relation to what? Why is speech the thing you're highlighting? What is happening here? Right, because he can't define any of these things using a scientific frame, because he's a relativist. And that's the fundamental, we'll call it, problem. Right? So yeah. All right. So I'll dive into construction of soul and world and wheat from chaff, unless you've got something, Noah. Just let us know. All righty then. Let me dive in, and we'll try to finish this out, and maybe we'll be done before I die. But, it'll be nice. The construction of soul and world seems to be a high bar for discussion in a short section in a chapter. So that's worth noting. Peterson states that things are organized with a language, but that, as we know, is incorrect. That's middle out thinking. You are assuming from the fact that things have been said to you that therefore language is the organization of the thing and not just the communication of a pre-existing organization. There's just so many problems with that frame. I don't know what to do with it. Why you would talk about language in a discussion about soul or world is completely beyond me. Like, these two things should just not be discussed in the same frame. Uh,
So if,
I
if I
think.
could just jump in here real quick,
Go
Mark,
ahead.
so I don't have to do it later. And you did mention some time sensitivity. There seems to be an implicit piece here that's missing, which is that, and I bring this up in part because of the comment about this does and seem to boil down to tell the truth or at least don't lie, and be
Yeah.
precise while you are doing that. And the soul piece doesn't necessarily connect to that, other than if you start lying and you start detaching yourself from reality, then, well, you've thrown your paddle over the side of your canoe trying to go upstream. So
Right.
you're doing something fundamentally misordered and not likely to be very successful. So I think
Yeah.
that's kind of where he's going here with this, is kind of like, if you're not precise, it'll have ramifications on your inner world. Um, but but
Yeah.
outside of that,
It
I
could.
can't make the connection myself.
Yeah. No. One does rely on the other. Yeah. I mean, you'd have to know what truth is before you could be precise. Right. So, yeah, there's definitely a connection there. And yeah, I mean, I would also say, yeah, if you lie, you lose your soul. That's true. But that's about lying and not about precision. So there's something incorrect about that. We'll say the more precise you are, the better ordered you could be in theory. But I don't think that's necessary at all. Like, I think that is fantastic thinking. Um, yeah. And then he goes into this whole thing about dragons hoard gold, right? But um, there's a way of interpreting that to say it is possible to be enriched from whatever catastrophe befalls you. And I had a conversation with Jess, who was on his way back from Midwest area, no doubt, about this, particularly in relation to the book of Job. And so I'll share that here. I think it's important to recognize that that is a thing, that the engagement with the dragon doesn't have to be as Peterson talks about it. Uh, it can be, oh, there are dragons, uh, and there are some riches to be gotten, even if the dragon burns the city or whatever. And I think that's a super important thing to discuss. But Peterson, you're not going to do it in his frame because he doesn't seem to have that frame. Uh, as for my totally continually lying about my time sensitivity, RJ, it's fine. Uh,
Well, be
I will
precise
spend.
in your language, Mark. Be
I,
precise in your timekeeping.
I am precise
Gosh.
in my being funny, because I will put in whatever time it takes to get this done, as I did last week with 9.5 hours
Well,
straight.
I was just about to pitch a Hobbit book club, and we could go through the Silmarillion and all the Lord of the
No,
Rings, and
no,
just go as
no,
long as possible. We'll
no.
always have something to be here for you folks.
Right.
But as far as my joke being concluded now, as you were, gentlemen, I
I
apologize.
I appreciate that. That was good. Yeah, we could do book clubs forever just on Tolkien. And those could take hours apiece for for real, fairly easily. And Peterson does have this idea that, confronting problems is good, but are they the right problems? And this is where his precision breaks down, right? It's still good advice, it's just insufficient because a lot of people create problems that aren't problems, right? They, uh, well, first of all, I'll just tell you, here's why I don't like people, because nobody tells you this, but it turns out all the problems of the world are created by people. There you go. And so, why do you like these creatures? They create nothing but problems, right? Or at least all of the problems are created by them. Uh, and yeah, I do that to be funny, but also there is a point in that a lot of these problems are not actual problems that need to exist. You do not need to worry about the fact that you do not have a perfect perception system for reality. Of course you don't. But everyone else is in the same boat, and everything seems to be fine, and we have electricity and internet after all. So the fact that that's always been true for everyone doesn't seem to have inhibited even our scientific quote progress, if in fact it is. Time will tell. So I don't know why this would be a topic for discussion ever. It seems like you're creating a quote philosophical or metaphysical crisis or problem that isn't one and doesn't need to be solved. Little hint, almost all quote philosophy past Aristotle is what I just described. It's creating problems that don't need to exist and don't need to be solved because nobody ever had that solution, and we have freaking internet. It's kind of a big deal. Like, I don't like, freaking, if we have wireless access to the sum total of human knowledge in our hand. And no one answered any of these Kantian questions, or no one resolved the Nietzschean death of God, or any of that. And yet everything seems to be okay. And in fact, way better now than it was before. The collapse of the materialist worldview is coming, but that's what everyone's sensing, by the way. So yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that Peterson does a lot of reliance on this individual idea that you can know things and then take difficult actions, but that's ridiculous. You need help. I couldn't write my book without Castle, and not only his editing, but his encouragement. And there were times when Castle couldn't edit my book without Sally Joe's encouragement. And really, we're all just helping Sally Joe because she's an artist. So there you go. Right? I think all of these things are intertwined. Like, we're not all just doing that, obviously. Now there's a book, and soon it will be for sale. Right? And so there's a lot going on, and it's connected in a reciprocal way. And that's the quality of relationship that re-enchants the world, which is what people are missing when they talk about meaning crisis. They can't enchant the world because they don't have that quality. Peterson, by pushing you back into individualism, which doesn't exist, and so please don't emulate that, places you in the meaning crisis while trying to solve it. So does Vervaeke, by the way, which I find ironic and also annoying and unnecessary. So before I move on to Wheat from Chaff, which is a slightly better section of this final chapter of today's book club, does anybody have anything that they want to go over from this previous section, or they want to go over in general?
I would just say for the folks at home, happiness and the soul are two different words for a very important reason. Look them up in the dictionary, Google them. Just don't confuse them. That's really the only point there. Like I said before, it seems to be lying is detrimental to you.
Right.
That's my big takeaway from that section.
Yeah, well said. It separates you from the world. And if you want to know where soul is in scientific terminology, they have cut the human up, or the person up, and separated all the parts that they don't like, and the part that's located in the mind they call consciousness, and that's where soul is in science, and that's why they're desperately trying to define and therefore control consciousness, because that's what science does. It's fundamentally a power as control through force or threat of force system. Very postmodern, like at least we'll say recent science. So that's where soul is for them. Don't be fooled by that gobbledygook nonsense. Just kind of avoid the whole consciousness debate. So wheat from chaff, which is interesting, right? Uh, the problem is that Peterson doesn't understand that precision isn't specification. In order to be precise, you need a pre-existing specification. So he's thinking backwards and middle out about this. Again, you don't know why he falls into this particular error, other than he doesn't understand creation and the fact
I
that
would
creation is
also
so
add,
important.
at this point, he probably didn't have the best understanding of the parable that he's referencing here either, under this
Yeah,
framing. But I just think that's kind of an important point for those who hear wheat from chaff and think, oh, he must be referring to um, some sort of biblical allusion and that usual understanding. That's not what's really being done
right.
here, at least in my reading. And
No,
from Mark's
clearly not.
agreements, it seems like Mark also had a different reading. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think Peterson's so-called biblical exegesis or whatever it is terrible. It's just flat out terrible. I'm sorry, it's just bad, all around. Not to say it's not useful. It's just like, but it's like childish stuff. And fair enough. He's a child with respect to these things because he didn't grow up in them. So like that's how it works. If you didn't grow up doing so, like I grew up, you know, sailing. So I'm not a child with respect to sailing because I did it when I was a child, right? Same for a bunch of skills like Boy Scouts, 4-H, all this stuff, right? But other people coming to sailing later in life are children to sailing. That's, that, that's correct. It's the most correct analogy that you can find for these things. And Peterson is coming into these things late. And the confusion is Christians will read it one way and think, aha, Peterson understands this, while ignoring the observation that Peterson doesn't understand it at all. And that's okay because he's meeting other people in a place. That's the lesson the so-called Christians should come to. Like, oh, he's meeting people in a place by doing terrible biblical exegesis. Well, that's an interesting thing to know. We might be able to use that if only you were humble enough to observe the world and realize, rather than get all puffed up that some academic is also playing your game. So,
But to dive into Peterson's version of wheat and chaff here, it seems to be a representation of one of his older points about his recommendations around writing, which is that
yeah,
you write and you write and you write and you write, and then you edit and you pull back as a way to uh, uh, tighten up, um,
right.
so to speak, and become more precise in that way. And so in that sense, that can fit in this framework. But in a different sense, the wheat and the chaff doesn't really work like that either.
Right.
It's not like wheat overgrows and then you pull back the bad wheat and then you only keep the good wheat. You take wheat, you take a part of it, you grind it up, so on and so forth. So there's a little bit of just of a misconnect or
Yep.
a shoot and a miss there,
Yep.
but that might be due to the framing and by constantly embedding these stories within each other. And we're now what next week will be 11 rules deep, and they do seem to be selected in an order which he did
Yep.
not, or at least the reader and from the way that the grammar is presented, the author does not present as clearly embedded.
Right.
They almost present as different frames, which can seem like a list, but then also leave you kind of going, okay, now what?
Right. And to be fair, I mean, the flat world needs a list. And that's why he's presenting this as a list. And the success not only of his self authoring program, but also of his Quora post from which this is derived. Waiting for the third book, Peterson, with the other 12 rules, the other three, the third set of 12 rules. Don't think I'm going to get it, but I'm still waiting for it. Yeah, I mean, I think that distorts sort of how he's dealing with this because he sees it a certain way from objective material reality. But a lot of what he's describing sounds more like the ability to discern and how that allows you to use some form of authority to confront. And I think that's actually a more important way to think about what he's talking about in this section of the chapter. Why he doesn't have that sense, I don't know. Because he jumps into evolution and backwards basically, right? He talks about your imagination. But actually, because evolution is true, your imagination is tuned to upregulate threats, right? Uh, that the idea of confrontation is a better way to think about this, right? What is the type of confrontation you should have? What are you discerning? That the better understanding of wheat and chaff is discernment. And that's important, right? Like, what are you discerning? How are you discerning it? Your imagination wants to cast the threats into the imagination where you won't die, right? But that again, that's an evolutionary certainty at some level. And Peterson insists that this process of organizing using writing, and organizing like your will, yourself, right? It's reasonably good, right? But it's insufficient and it doesn't work for most people, right? And the bottom line is, if you just observe the world, people who don't do what he's talking about here, who don't write and organize their will, are actually far better off on average. And I think, again, this gets back to my earlier point. A lot of people are mimicking an outlier. They're not actually, like, you're not Elon Musk. You're not going to be Elon Musk. Copying Elon Musk might be okay for you, but almost certainly isn't going to result in the same thing, right? And I think because this works for so many of the people that are filtered out within academia, that Peterson thinks it will work universally way better than it does. And he's ignoring the observation that a bunch of people that can't do anything like this are happy and function really well and make more money than academics. He's just ignoring all that data. And fair enough. I mean, filters are the primary way in which we experience the world. But he does some strange things in here because dragons are gone, monsters are in, and he switches from ignoring dragons to hiding monsters. And I don't know why why this happens. This is a very strange thing to write at some level. It's very strange to start talking about monsters without talking about the difference between monsters and dragons, because dragons are a type of monster. Even if they are, we'll say, the most real or something, which I think he alludes to at some point. I'm not going to pretend I understand this. It just seems like a deep, bizarre, strange confusion to me. It's good, though, that, Peterson sort of alludes to the fact that you can't have a discussion about everything. Right? Yeah, don't try to tie too much into the world. Don't try to worry about the freaking war in Ukraine or Gaza or whatever, right? Like, you can't tie that stuff together, right? Break things down into resolvable parts, not problems, right? because a lot of the parts that you can break things down into are things you can come to accept. And that is one thing that Peterson's missing. Science only has one mode: divide things into parts and resolve a question. It doesn't have, except the fact that the particle wave duality exists, right? They're constantly trying to fix that and get a unified grand theory and do goofy things, instead of accepting that the world is made up of multiple parts and you're not getting around that, right? It is the whole scientific project. All of it suffers from this problem. Probably Newton's fault, by the way, because Newton was an alchemist originally. See the Mosaic Arc episode. Again, Gustav's recommend you start like an hour and 5 or an hour and 8 minutes in. I'm going to watch the whole thing eventually. I did watch from an hour or so onward. It was great. I think you are responsible for bringing forth habitable, not arbitrary, right? Because that's sneaking in the ghost in the machine again. Habitable order from chaos. Like, you're responsible for that, right? Indeed, in fact, struggle is required. And that also means that what is required of the world, or for the world, of you, is to be better. In other words, the world needs you to be better, right? If you want the world to be better, you need to be better. Peterson would do well to understand all of this, even though I don't think he will, which is, to me, rather unfortunate. But I think that's better framing. And I think it's worth it on both sides for people to note errors and articulate them to others. So you can note errors in yourself, or you can note errors in others and then articulate them, right? And then strive to correct them. But those, to me, are functions of being responsible. Doing the hard thing because life is struggle. And the more struggle that you take on appropriately, don't struggle against the Ukraine war, guys. Don't go protest about things that you have no control over, and that you think people with control are listening to you, but more likely they're going, oh, there's those crazy people with signs again. How annoying. You're not helping your case. Sorry. I'm not saying no one should ever do anything. I'm just saying you should be really careful about that. Vanticay. On page 268, Peterson says the world of God extracted order from chaos, instead of imposed, which I think would be more accurate. I agree, Vanticay. It's a good catch. I'm probably going to avoid going into like all the problems of his reading Bible, but Vanticay, it sounds like a similar extraction method on 281, which, it is very strange. It's incoherent because it's scientific. Science by itself, which is oddly is Peterson's point over and over again in Maps of Meaning, science itself is incoherent on its own. It's incoherent. It can be used within a framework, but we don't know this because we're missing our ability to comprehend the world ourselves. It's that flood of literacy at the cost of comprehension. That is the end of my notes. I didn't think I would make it, but in fact, I yet live. Who wants to round this out before we go into implementation and then close out with our reflection and our statement of change?
So I want to make a comment on this section. So just to the point of the misunderstanding of the parable there, that it's often called wheat and chaff. That's actually not what it's about. So the whole thing, now we have been talking about refinement in a decent portion of this chapter. And so it makes sense that under the guise of wheat and chaff, that does make sense. But of course, that's not actually what it was. Explicitly wheat and tares. It was explicitly a plant of a completely different seed, which has been identified as darnel ryegrass, which is poisonous to humans and animals. But it looks, in the early stages until like full maturity, which is also interesting that maturity comes up a decent bit in this chapter. That until full maturity, it looks almost identical to wheat. And so, and it's the seeds that are actually poisonous. So you can tell the difference once they're both mature, but right up until that point, I mean, the wheat has these beautiful edible seeds, and then the darnel has this sort of black poisonous seed, which actually it's a nasty one too. It's from some sort of fungus that has like psychotoxins, so you can actually have like neurological damage from this. And of course, people used to make beer and bread out of it. They don't do that anymore. So it just kind of gives you an idea. So just this sort of thing of you have these things under different principles that seem to be the same, but then when they mature and start to perpetuate, you start noticing like, oh, there's actually zero integration for this and no amount of refinement, even though people sure tried. No amount of refinement can actually integrate that into something consumable, or something that can be used to build something up. And so that I think is a really important distinction between, oh, you just have to kind of refine, like take some of the, the dead wood off or something like that. It's a complete, like this is to the point of precision. This is a complete separating and cutting off of a pretty significant portion of something that is not of the same principles as the thing you actually want to integrate.
Even though it looks the same, right?
Mhm.
Principles are more than skin deep, we'll say.
Yeah.
Right. It's super important lesson from that particular parable. But also, yeah, Peterson doesn't know it. Unfortunate. Cut away the poisonous stuff. Yeah, it's a good hint. Peterson would never do that. He's too much of a leftist. Sad but true. Anyone else want to round this out and sort of before I do implementation?
I think that, the rules at the beginning of the sections are still good rules aphoristically. I think there's a little bit of a misconnect with some of how he tries to get those things across, but he's also talking through a book to whoever it could be. So it's also important to understand that, while you are the third thing that we've talked about throughout today's session, the book is written for an unknown audience.
Yeah.
And for more on that was touched on, I think we've touched on that. You touched on that in other places, but context is key, and keeping the context of the book as we go along has been helpful and was important in this chapter. And I'll say more in just a moment.
Sure. Thanks. Yanga, JBP is talking to children. Well, yeah, he is, because the world is immature, and he knows that, and that's why they refer to him as Papa Peterson sometimes, or Father Peterson, right? So they know it too, and that's a good thing, that we know that we have a bunch of children that are in their 20s and 30s and 40s in some cases, and we need to deal with that. That's super important. It's one of the things that the Christian apologists are missing about Peterson. Peterson knows how to talk to, we'll say, overaged children who have spotty and very shallow understandings of the world and need depth and need to know that their understandings of the world are spotty and shallow so that they seek the depth. And Paul Vanderklay is right about, well, someone needs to pick them up where Peterson leaves them off. Yeah, I wish he had done that, but unfortunately he has failed me. Implementation. How do you implement this? Well, you need to know what it means to be precise in your speech, right? You need to know what it is you're up to, and you need to measure that against your own expectations, but also have other people help you, because they have a perspective that is not your perspective, that contains information that you cannot therefore have ever, right? The whole, oh, my wife knows me better than I know myself. Weird that anybody would ever come up with such a formulation unless there weren't a way in which that was true. And so that's the takeaway here for me is, yeah, you want to know what the hell is going on. And in order to be precise, you have to try over and over again and measure your damn results. That's where this comes in. Well, the part about your speech is helpful because the way we communicate with other people is speech, big reveal. It's not the only way and it's not the best way, but it is a way, and it might be the primary way. And maybe that's bad, but also you got to go what you got. So I prefer that you be precise in your action, right? But precision is important, and that's the way I would make this sort of better on the implementation side. Anybody else have any implementation hints before we go into closing reflection and statement of change?
Yeah, I just want to say, to the points that he makes near the end, and to also bounce off of what you've been talking about, he says, determining where you're starting and where you're going. And I want to just kind of fan that out into orientation, to your point, needing other people to help you orient. This sort of thing of knowing where am I starting, where not necessarily I know exactly where the destination is, but where am I heading right now? And can people assist me along the way? Can I identify maybe even some of the milestones that have been reached or are in front of me? So you can get a kind of better idea of your bearing. And then also, not avoiding diagnostic or judgment, which I sometimes use sort of interchangeably, because a lot of times people think, oh, this person is judging me, kind of imposing some sort of, fault on me. But a lot of times this diagnostic of just here's the truth of what the conditions are right now, people will still feel the same way. So in a certain sense, it's almost like the, self-consciousness and misery being almost the same emotion, but being willing to struggle with that and recognize, oh, my bearing is off. Like sometimes it's like, yes, that is a judgment. You steered in the wrong direction, but also the sooner you find that out, the sooner you can correct it. And maybe if you have that display, like especially you think of someone, piloting a plane or driving a car or whatever, just having the display in front of you and being able to quickly reference that, and knowing that you can rely on those few tools and also rely on people to kind of assist you if you ever run into trouble. That sort of thing is extremely useful for also not suffering greater judgment down the line of, oh, I failed to respond to the check engine light for 7 months or something like that. And it's like, yeah, at that point it is on you, and there's a much greater judgment than, oh, I failed to change my oil within a certain amount of time, and now I've got the check engine light or something like that. It's like, no, that's okay. You wait 7 months, that's a much bigger problem and much less excusable.
Yeah, well said. All right. Noah, what you got? I guess we'll segue into the closing reflection and integration time. I want everybody to do this because I think it's super important to the book club. So, yeah, I mean, the whole point of this is to help integrate what you've heard and maybe what you read or what you got out of this. Either way, even if you didn't do the reading, hopefully it's not negative. I know I'm critiquing Peterson to some great degree, but also there's a lot of good stuff in here and he helped a lot of people. So we've got to extract as much out of it, we'll say, as we can. And Vantike has one quick comment. Being precise is good insofar as you're accurate and that you're aimed properly. Exactly. Yeah, accuracy and precision is always interesting. There's a couple good videos out there about that. So let's all take about 30 seconds and sort of reflect on what we've heard, hopefully focusing on the pragmatic and the positive. And then we will resume with a statement of change from everybody. So you can reflect on that if you'd like. And look, it's 30 seconds of silence, so let's do it. All right. Hopefully that was enough for everybody to get a sense. I mean, you should do that whenever you read anything, really. You should take a break and then, right. Slow transitions are really good. You can't do them all the time, and you shouldn't, but you should do them most of the time because they're great. And that's part of what that's meant to facilitate. So, uh, Castle, what will you actually change based on what you learned today?
Yeah, so I think, and this has been not so much in the book clubs, but just for me, a little bit more of a recurring theme this last 7 to 10 days, is that really just kind of focusing on, you talk about like the video game reality, and I've kind of pointed out that, I mean, and something you pointed out for sure is that it's a pretty pernicious problem right now, but it's also always been a problem in a certain sense, and I even like last week I make certain like ancient examples of people kind of living in video game reality, or deceiving themselves, or living in sort of a virtual reality within their own imagination. So something I've been kind of noticing is this tendency to, when in a place where I might need to address something with confrontation, not necessarily another human being, but just, in order to accept a particular truth, or to start addressing a problem, you have to actually accept that you're now going to have to feel these things when you're dealing with it. And there's sort of a tendency to like retreat into fantasy, or I'd rather distract myself, or something like that. So really just kind of drilling down, and being more precise and intentional with how I'm using my time, even interiorly, and then, of course, still checking in with the appropriate people, communicating that. I mean, I have a system where I can do that on a weekly basis, which is good. So I'm going to kind of be more intentional within that frame moving forward, I think, starting this week.
Great. RJ, what's your statement of change?
To intentionally be more precise with whatever it is that I'm doing, but in my thinking, really just kind of in my plans, and especially my plans for the day. Um,
Mm,
it's one thing to be precise, is to say, here's what I want to get done, but you can be more precise and say, here's how much time I'd like to take. You
yeah.
you can also say, here's some other things I'd like to get done as well, or some additional goals. So just ways to make note taking and planning, and using some of those tools that are not part of yourself, as I was mentioning, but you can use to improve yourself, to do so. So I think that will be my takeaway, and the thing that I will try to do.
Excellent. I like that. Noah, what you got? Can't hear you, Noah. I don't know if if your mic's not working or what's going on. Here, let me just read Vanticay. Vanticay, it's against my nature to point out the flaws of other people, so I'd like to practice doing that diplomatically with my family. Ooh, I like that. That's like really good. That's excellent. Um, yeah, I like that a lot. I'll just give mine. Noah's mic isn't working. We can tell because he always has background noise, and he was unmuted and there was no background noise. So I'm sure something happened over there. And Noah, you can type it in the chat if you want. We can read it out for you. Yeah. I mean, for me, uh, these two rules, right? Assume the person you're listening to might know something that you don't, and be precise in your speech, are really all about practicing framing, practicing understanding what perspective other people and you are coming at things with, which is very anti-postmodern, I know, but also they're evil, so I'm against them. Just to let you know, I'm going to separate the wheat from the tares here for sure. That's no good. You know, I still accept Peterson's framing in the book, and that's fine. And we're just trying to extract more out of it. That's what we're trying to do. And so I want to keep extracting more out of it, especially as we'll say time goes on. So anybody else in the chat? Noah, is your mic working? You want to chime in? Not even close. Okay. Yeah. This so far has been an interesting and unexpected journey. There's a lot more coming. We are going to rebrand the channel slightly. Navigating Patterns is not going away. It's just being incorporated under the Mark of Wisdom brand. You should always aim for the Mark of Wisdom. That's what you should do. And you know, our thrust, especially with things like the book club, is for people to be better, because the world needs you. And when you're better, the world gets better. So you don't need to solve the war in Ukraine problem or the politics problem or anything. You can just kind of go, be better. Like, focus on you. You have the most control over you. Noah says he's going to try to attend more to orientation and framing. Excellent. When my own perspective interferes, or I take someone else's perspective and cancel my own out, especially those around me, my family especially. Yeah, look, I mean, you have to, that's a good step towards integrating yourself into the environment that you're in, is to be a little bit humble, work with a little humility, and that way you can figure out how to integrate, right? And that's super important. CC will do better, be better, baby. Yeah, exactly. Even if you don't do better, just be better. It'll be fine, right? And don't let the perfect be the enemy of the better. All right, guys, we're gonna wrap this book up finally here in part 6, week 6, with the last 2 rules, right? Which are 11 and 12. Do not bother children when they're skateboarding. Boy, that's going to be an interesting chapter. And pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. And maybe we'll make some comments at the end about the structure of the book, which will be evident at the end in the tuplets that the chapters seem to fall into, for example, and why that might be important. And look, I want everybody to be better. I want everybody to have a great week. And I will see you. It's 2 p.m. Eastern Time, Sunday, in 7 days. Try to use these reflections and use this book club to enhance your life. Hopefully, we've upgraded Peterson for you. And look, take good care of yourself and take good care of each other.